Good evening and welcome to the Planning Committee of, well, I think it's Monday 16th of January, but that's really not the right date for it. The reconvened meeting of the 8th of, is it the 8th of February or the 6th of February? 8th, it is the 8th. Lost track of all time. Thank you everybody for being here. Obviously this is reconvened and we had to cancel the previous one, so I'd like to thank everybody for coming along and managing the disruption that we've had with this. Today is a very long and very controversial, I would say, agenda. As such, I'm going to be a bit harsh with you. You ask your questions at the right time, you debate at the right time. We don't make points that have been made before, because otherwise we're going to be here till 11 o'clock, and I'm quite sure the people who are here for the last item on the agenda really don't want that to happen. So just obviously in the spirit of democracy, I want to hear as much as we can, but be aware of if you're repeating things or you're making things a little bit longer than they need to be, because it's going to be a really long night. Okay, we're going to go to agenda item number 1, which is apologies for absence, and we have apologies from Councillor Bowles, Sutton and Hammerford. Okay, next item on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. You've all got a copy of that in your agenda pack. Is everybody happy for me to sign that as a proper representation of the meeting? All those in favour? Thank you. Declarations of interest, we all know how that works. So before any item where you might have a declaration, Councillor Mitchell, if you just make your declaration and do what is necessarily for the appropriateness of that declaration. Under the Local Government Access to Information Act, we do not have any items that should be seen in part 2, so that's not a worry for anybody. We move to item number 5, which is the land at St Bridget's Nursery, and I think that's Chris. Over to you, Chris.
Good evening. So following on from the officer report and additional information sheet that was sent out, there's been 2 more representations received from the public objecting to the proposal on grounds of highway safety, preferred use of third-party land for the access points, disruption to dwellings on Old Ryden Lane, and assessment of proposed traffic regulation orders. It's considered these matters have been addressed in the officer report, so no further detail is needed at this time. So this is an outline application for 350 dwellings with all matters reserved except access. The application site itself is a 13.2 hectare plot of land currently in use as offices and growing space for St Bridget Nursery. The public facing areas of the nursery are now situated in Clist St Mary. So this is just used for their sort of growing side of things. The site is bordered by the A379 Ryden Lane to the northwest, Old Ryden Lane to the south, and to the east you've got a residential development and then some third-party land between the application site and the New Court Way Road. You can see it better with this red line plan showing the site boundaries. The site has been allocated for residential use in the local plan, the core strategy, and the New Court master plan, and it's proposed for allocation in the draft Exeter plan as well, which proposes 334 dwellings for the site. It's considered that this would demonstrate an in-principle support for residential development in this location. In terms of, this is an indicative site plan. The only matters that we actually have any details on at this stage are the access points, which I'll go into in detail in a second. So there's 2 access points proposed, one on the western side onto Ryden Lane, and then one on the eastern side onto Old Ryden Lane, which then goes to the east, connecting with New Court Way. So this plan is the Old Ryden Lane junction. It's proposed to create a new road through the site itself to take traffic away from Old Ryden Lane, and so there's a road designed appropriately for 2-way traffic. The Highway Authority have been consulted on the proposal. and having assessed the submitted transport assessment and associated drawings, consider that there will not be any severe impacts on the local network, and they raised no objections to development. So on the Old Ryden Lane side, there's a proposal to alter the junction slightly to create this road into the new site. It's also proposed to stop through traffic on Old Ryden Lane. It is on there. That laser pointer. If I can angle it right. I'll get up and point to it a second. So this point here, back to the microphone. At that point, it's proposed to put some form of bollards or some other type of infrastructure to stop traffic going through there, so that everything goes through the new road instead. A traffic regulation order would be required for that separately from this application. The highway assessment demonstrated that there's suitable capacity on Ryden Lane to accommodate the vehicle movements, and there's an existing dedicated right turn lane from Ryden Lane into Old Ryden Lane, which will limit queuing traffic and impacts on the wider road network. There's an existing pedestrian and cycle crossing on Old Ryden Lane at this point, and this would be retained with a raised table with enough space for vehicles to stop on Old Ryden Lane and not cause traffic impacts onto Ryden Lane itself. Yes. That makes way more sense. Forgive me for the first time. So we've got the raised table is approximately here. There's also 3 dwellings on Old Ryden Lane, which are adjacent to this new part of the highway. It's considered that traffic movements from those properties will not be negatively impacted by the changes. They come out onto what is likely to be a pedestrian and cycle footway there, and there is suitable space for vehicles to pull out without blocking the new road itself. Just got some photos of the Ryden Lane and the junction with Old Ryden Lane. I can come back to these later if you wanted to see any of them. That's the existing raised table. And then on the eastern side of it, it's proposed to connect into a one-way street heading east towards New Court Way, with an additional side road to allow traffic to connect to the two-way new street going through. So this would connect into a one-way street going east, and then there would be a side road here to allow movement from these vehicles around so they can get in. It is also very likely that there will be additional side roads connecting onto Old Ryden Lane from the new road and from the development, but we wouldn't know what they are at this stage. That would be dealt with at Preserve Matters. In terms of the one-way street, it's currently being, so I'll start again with that. The far eastern side of Old Ryden Lane is already a one-way street going east only. At the moment, the next part of Old Ryden Lane is going through a traffic regulation order to extend that one-way street, which has come through as part of the Holland Park development to the south. That has been approved by councillors, and it's just waiting for the developer to provide the details of and arrange the works. That TRO is therefore considered to be approved in principle, and once Highways have had the details from the developer, that TRO will be officially sealed and ready to implement. This next slide shows part of where that one-way strip will actually be. So the site exit will be here, And at the moment, the TRO that's just waiting to be finished relates to turning the stretch between this road, Regency Drive, and Newport Drive into a one-way street to connect with the existing one-way street on that far end.
So can you go back to that previous slide?
Yes, maybe. How do I go back on this?
So I really can't see where. Sorry, Chair. May I ask you a question?
Okay. Yeah, do that.
This slide?
Yeah, that slide. So the green arrow showing the one way.
Yes.
Yeah. So at the very bottom of that picture, just before the L, I think if my glasses are working, can people get out from the bottom?
Down here?
Yeah. Can you exit from there?
No, there's no pedestrians can, but there's no vehicle movements through there. It won't. There is no way for vehicles to get into that area and use it as a rat run.
Okay, so this is showing just car movements then.
Yes, this slide itself relates to the TRO that's currently being dealt with as part of the Holland Park development. But I thought it would be useful to help show where the proposed traffic movements would be.
Thank you.
So these are just photos of, this is where the one-way part of it will be coming in through the new TRO. As you can see, the road is a lot narrower at this point. It's noted in a lot of comments from the public about a connection to the northeast corner, which is onto third-party land linking up to the roundabout by IKEA. This would require going through third-party land and doesn't form part of this application. As part of this particular scheme, we are securing through the Section 106 a link up to the site boundary in that location. So if the third-party land does come forward in future, there will be a connection ready and waiting for them there. In relation to other matters such as noise, air quality, drainage and biodiversity, the proposal is not considered to generate any significant impacts, and full details of all of these would be required at reserved matters. There is a Section 106 for this proposal, which includes affordable housing levels of 35%. All the full details of contributions and obligations are set out in the report. Overall, it's considered that there's no significant material impacts from the site in relation to the principle of development and the access. Suitable measures can be integrated into the scheme on other aspects such as drainage, biodiversity, trees, and the reserved matters would handle them. The application is therefore recommended to the Planning Committee for conditional approval.
Right, I'm going to take Chair's prerogative and ask the first question. All matters are reserved apart from access, so that includes the access from the A379, yeah?
The A379 access is part of this application.
Yes, right. That's
yeah. So it's the two access points on the southern
my
side.
next question to the committee is: can I take any highways questions first of all, and then we'll move on to the rest, because I have a feeling highways are probably what you're going to want to ask a lot of questions about. So starting with Councillor Moore, and I think Ben, it's going to be you answering for a bit, okay?
Thank you. Could you put the map back, showing the site, please? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Can you first of all point out where the third party land is so I can be really clear?
The third party land in question is this stretch of land up here, plot of land.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a couple of highways questions. The first one, in the papers, it talks about bus routes, and it says that the bus connections are to the northeast of the site, and then it's got some data about average walking distances, but that's measured from the edge of the site, not like, you know, the middle of the site. So can you just show me where the bus routes are and where do they connect up, particularly if there's a one-way route to the south, how do they connect up to Topsham or anywhere else? My second question is, so if people come in off Ride and coming from that side, yeah, sorry, I'm no good with remembering the names, yeah. and this is a major now turning into a major road to go through the estate. So can you tell me what status that road will have, and what provision will there be for pedestrians and cyclists so that they have separate and safe paths through, given that that's going to be a major route through the estate? And thirdly, I would like to know about, you haven't talked about walking and cycling, so how is that going to work on the estate and connections to and through other areas? It's not quite clear to me how people, obviously there's quite actually good cycle route, I've been up and down it on the main road, which is quite astounded me. But if you're cycling, I don't know how you would join it because it's on the other side of the road. And my last question is, that crossing point that you showed us at the beginning, is that going to be upgraded to be a pelican crossing or something that's managed? Because at the minute it's just a hump in the road. Thank you.
Okay, Ben, or do you both need to answer some of those questions?
I think we'll both have to answer
Okay.
some of them. Do you want to do the bus one first? Yeah, do that. Let you do that one.
I must admit, I don't know the exact routes of the bus route through the area. Obviously, that's something which is dealt with by the transport team within Devon County Council for specifically regarding the buses. There is a potential for bus routes to be moved through the site if this was to be granted, and to further link bus facilities through to the rest of Exeter from there. The internal road itself obviously is something that will be looked at specifically at reserved matters. So the scale and the design of that will be, we as a higher authority will be looking to ensure that that has got sufficient space for the buses to be able to travel through as well. Just quickly regarding the PED cycle information that you mentioned as well. Again, that will be looked at as part of the reserved matters. We as the higher authority would want to ensure that there is sufficient space for PEDs and cycles to be along the side of the road that would go through the site, certainly looking to make sure it's LTN 120 compliant, to ensure that there's a barrier between the actual carriageway where vehicles will be on, as well as and then separation for the PEDs and cycles.
I'll jump in there on. In terms of the pedestrians and cycles, through the Section 106 agreement, we're looking to put a minimum of 2 connections along this boundary to link up with the existing cycle and pedestrian route, and they would also be required to create north-south connections to Old Ryden Lane. In addition, the road linking to the third-party land in the northeast corner, that would also have pedestrian and cycle routes up to the site boundary, so that future connections could be made easily into that area.
Answering your questions.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Okay.
And the access that you pointed out at the northeast seems to be some confusion about that. Let's put it that way. In the report, it says there is potential for a future connection. The letter written by the owner of that land makes it clear that he's open for discussion about that land, which would mean that it would be possibly a real prospect. And it seems on any looking at the map that if that site is to be developed as planned, that's a much better exit for vehicles. Can you explain that confusion? And the other aspect of highways is that an awful lot of the letters of objection talk about accidents, near misses along the Old Ryden Lane bit. They're the people who live there. They hear the screech of the wheels and pick up the hubcaps. It does seem to me that if anything can be done to avoid additional traffic along there, and there will be considerable additional traffic, that it would be much better for cyclists, walkers and car drivers. So is it not possible to look more closely at the unexplored junction?
In terms of that northeast junction, because it falls outside of the site boundary, although a connection through it would be would be welcomed and would link up to that roundabout, we have to assess what has been put in front of us by the applicant, and they have chosen not to do or not to engage with the third party on that access. In terms of this application, we therefore have to consider that what the accesses they propose and whether they are acceptable. And based on consultations with highways, it's considered that the access points onto Old Ryden Lane are suitable in their current form without the need for that northeast connection as well. And I don't. Do you want to talk about the safety aspect?
I apologise for Councillor Moore. There was one aspect of the questions that she raised which I wasn't able to answer, which was regarding the raised table. That will be slightly upgraded. It would be an uncontrolled crossing as opposed to a controlled crossing, because a controlled crossing would have further potential impacts on Ryden Lane itself, with the timings it would take potentially for people to cross, with signal crossings, for example. So the red cycle on that might mean that vehicles would queue further back onto Old Ryden Lane, and considering the number of vehicle movements as well and pedestrian movements there, an uncontrolled crossing would be considered appropriate in that situation. In terms of the safety aspects, which were raised as well, we as a highway authority, as part of the planning consultation, have to look at the last 5 years of personal injury collisions that have taken place in the vicinity. On our mapping system, it showed that there were 3 accidents that had happened within the last 5 years. At the time of writing, I'm aware, obviously, there's been an accident since, but I would say that that is the only recorded accident between a ped and a cycle and a vehicle in that location, certainly even looking back further to the last 10 years as well.
Are there any other questions on the highways matters?
Thank you, Chair. Ben, you just said about the timescale in the RTC reports. Sorry, that's road traffic collisions, if you don't know. The last one was near fatal, wasn't it? If you read the paperwork, it was a near fatal accident. Yeah. That site, with its traffic, has only really been in motion for, what, just for 10 years. This is an additional 350 vehicles, possibly, that all try to move about and go through that junction. They'll know for the fact that Old Ryden Lane is going to be congested in the mornings, so they'll try and go through Newcourt way, around that way, with the Newcourt estate. Is that not just adding fuel to a fire that's already starting to appear? Because it is quite renowned for young people, cyclists, dog walkers, use that facility to negotiate. It's supposed to be a green lane, isn't it, on paper? But that's not making it a green lane, is it?
So the application would create the internal road, which would move all the vehicle movements through there rather than on the current Old Ryden Lane. So vehicle movements for anyone who plans to use it would go through the site, through the proposed new road that would be going through there as well. I would also say to remember that the site does have an extent use at the moment, and its potential vehicle movements that could be generated from the site as it is at the moment needs to be taken into consideration, as well as considering the number of vehicle movements that the potential 350 dwellings could generate as well.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can try and be quick. Have the developers not approached the third-party landowner to see whether they would negotiate or get into a consultation with them? To your knowledge?
To my knowledge, it wouldn't be up to the Highway Authority to be party to those conversations. Obviously, we provide comments to the local planning authority on what's put in front of us. You can add.
I did ask them about that, but they didn't give me particularly much information about whether they'd approached them or not, referring to the matter that, as a planning authority, we have to assess what has been put in front of us and can insist on third-party land being introduced to a scheme.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Councillor Lights.
Just a quick question for Ben. Might be putting you a little bit on the spot, which isn't my intention. When you give those numbers for the number of accidents in the last decade, do you know if those are in line with kind of average numbers for that kind of road? Are they below average or above average?
I wouldn't know the exact answer to that, I'm afraid, in terms of average. The average that would be going on either nationwide or throughout the county. Every junction is unique. Every junction has its own aspects that need to be looked at, and how it's approached by both pedestrians, cyclists, and also vehicles as well. So I couldn't say. I'm sorry.
So I think the general vibe we're getting from the room is that there is quite a concern about that A379 junction, and that we we are not the Highways Authority. We are not the people that decide on that. So I think I'm asking you very clearly is that you are happy as a Highways Authority that that junction is suitable for the development that's coming.
The junction was safety audited and a safety audit was undertaken. And as we said, the higher authority, we as a higher authority myself, looking at the application, raised no objection to it as per the MPPF.
Right. Does anyone have any questions that don't relate to highways? Start with Councillor Jobson, then go to Councillor Morphy.
Thank you. I understand that there is a row of trees that abut the backs of houses on Albatross Road, and the impression is that they are to be destroyed. Now, if that is right, why? Because they are trees that give some shelter and protection to the homes, the gardens on Albatross Road, and will be detrimental to the amenity of people on Albatross Road. Chair, do you want me to go through other questions or just stick to one at a
You
time?
do all of them.
Thank you.
And then I think that will speed it up a little bit.
Thank you very much. And the other issue is play space. Now, I note in the design and access statement that they talk about play space, and it doesn't seem very many square meters. I'm trying to find it, but don't worry. It's section 4.7 of the design and access statement. Page 44 of the report talks about public open space with play areas. Page 55 of the report refers to the comments of the public and green spaces team. It's undoubtedly my fault, but I couldn't find the public and green spaces comments. I mean, I can see bits of green space there. Is there going to be a play park? Is that going to be provided by the developer for younger children? Are there going to be good facilities for teenagers? 350 homes could mean an awful lot of children who need access to adequate play space because the gardens of these properties aren't very large. Thank you.
So in terms of trees, at this stage, we don't know what's happening with the trees that would border onto Albatross Road, which would be any trees along this stretch here. Because the overall design of the site is subject to reserved matters, we don't really know what they're proposing. That being said, we have advised them to take a good look at the tree survey that they undertook and look at preserving as much of the A quality trees and B quality trees that they can along that whilst looking at their design. The trees that actually we know about at this point, there is one tree at the entrance here, and there is a couple of trees on the other entrance as well, which are mostly C and U quality with one B quality tree there. In terms of play space, we are securing it through the Section 106 agreement for 3 different types of play space. So it should be suitable for all of the ages that are required, because there is an undersupply in certain areas in that area. So as part of that, they would be looking at bringing in as much as we can for it.
Might I ask a very quick question on the trees? Is it possible, and it's possibly a question for you, as to whether this committee can seek a condition at this stage that those trees in Albatross, the back Albatross Road, are not removed?
I don't think we can, because it's an outline application with all matters reserved apart from access. So it will be for when it comes before us next time to look at it then. So it is a conversation we can have, and I'm sure if quality trees are to be lost, then the developer will have that conversation with the officers who are very capable of doing it. But having not seen the trees, I'm not sure if they need to be conditioned. So I think it's a little bit dangerous for us to go that far. But at this point, they can't touch the trees. All we're doing is an outline application. Councillor Moore is next, and then to you, Councillor Branston.
In the report, it says that the developer hasn't yet been to the design review panel, and therefore there's quite a few things in here which sort of says it has potential for, or it could do. So, for example, it talks about its potential for fabric first approach or potential for solar panels. So it just feels that there isn't. Obviously, these things will come forward later, but it just feels a bit vague at the moment in order to know what we're consenting to. The other,
the outline application will be vague because it's an outline application. It tests the principle of development. We're not approving anything other than the access at this point. So none of these comments are there for a general idea, but it doesn't bind us or the developer to it. The only thing we'll be bound to is access.
Okay. The other question I had was about numbers.
Yep.
So the proposed number of dwellings is below that set out in the master plan, which is quite a significant number below that. So what effect will that have on the council's targets, and what discussions has been had with the developers about density?
Chris, because I've had that conversation with you too.
So we've had conversations about density on the site. It's a maximum of 350 dwellings proposed. The draft Exeter plan actually sets out a level of 334 dwellings for the site. So this is actually a little bit higher than the upcoming local plan allocation for it. In terms of the density, because of the size of the site, it needs to be a mix of housing types. So it will seem like you can fit more on there when you look at the plan like this, but in order to accommodate a wide range of 1-bed, 2-bed, 3-bed, 4-bed dwellings with suitable garden spaces and green open space on it, that is why it has come in at that level. I did speak to the developer about whether they wanted to look at trying to do it at a higher level, but they seem to think that 350 was the absolute maximum that they would realistically be able to get on there. And from personal experience dealing with outline applications, quite often when they come in at a later stage, it may be lower because of other constraints or restrictions on site that are found.
Councillor Branston?
Thank you, Chair. I know it's a revised matter, but on pages both 27 and 35, the tree manager stated that due to the number and quality of trees on site, that will be challenging to meet the number of units. So what I really would like to know, that before final decision is made, that we actually know how many quality trees will be lost and how many will be replaced.
We don't know at this point.
No,
it's an
I
outline.
appreciate
Yeah,
that.
if it
Yeah.
well, it will come back to us as a reserve matter, and
Yeah.
I imagine it will come to committee based
Yeah.
on the scale and the
Fine.
level of interest publicly. So
Yeah,
we
thank you.
will know at that point. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, in that case, we're out of questions. So I'm going to ask the local councillor speaking under Standing Order 44, which is Councillor Ellis-Jones, to come forward. You don't have a time limit, Councillor Ellis-Jones, but you are welcome not to fill hours, please.
Which one? Green.
The speaking case.
Can you turn off your?
Oh.
Sorry,
Hello.
okay.
Oh, literally like that.
It's not easier, it's just the stuff that works like that.
Ah, thank you. Okay. You may be pleased to know that I thought that the 3-minute time limit applied to me. So I shall be. Thank you. So thank you, Chair. I'm here today to represent the many residents of the ward who couldn't make it, and obviously those who are here as well, and would like to have their voice heard. I want to start by saying that I appreciate that the council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year land supply and the challenges that poses for us. I also appreciate there's a need for more homes for local people, and I celebrate that 35% of the homes in this development will be affordable. I don't think development here is a particular surprise, given, as we mentioned, the inclusion in the New Court Master Plan and more recently in the Exeter Plan, on which there was much consultation. However, and despite what was a good presentation by officers, which I thank them for, Major concerns lie in the proposed access to the site, which, as pointed out by a number of respondents, seems far from ideal at best and blatantly dangerous at worst. The proposal is for residents to turn off an increasingly busy, given other developments in the area, such as the Holland Park development, Ryden Lane, into Old Ryden Lane. You mentioned the accidents in this area. By my, looking at the local news, this area has been the site of not one, but two near fatal road collisions in the last 3 years. So 4 weeks ago and, 3 years ago. I appreciate there are junction amendments being made, but the traffic assessment suggests an increase in two-way trips down the lane of 87% in the AM and 58% in the PM. That is a significant change. A traffic regulation order to make part of the lane one way at its narrowest point, the Holland Park development, is currently being consulted on. Well, as you mentioned, it seems to be going through. Potentially a positive that cyclists and pedestrians face traffic in only one direction at that point, but I refute the suggestion that this wouldn't become some sort of a dangerous rat run in what's a very residential area. Right, we're funneling all of this traffic down a one-way system into central Newcourt. So what's the alternative? It comes as no surprise that I, alongside many other Topsham residents, think the situation relating to the IKEA roundabout is pretty farcical. This application was first submitted in April 2022, but there's been no communication between the housing developer and the landowner, who, by records that I have, is open to negotiating and has said they haven't been approached, is bizarre. Whilst the report by officers suggests that the proposed entrance at Old Ryden Lane Junction is sufficient based on the Highway Authority assessment, the addition of this of a further entrance near IKEA as part of the Section 106 agreement to be dealt with at the reserve matter stage suggests that they see what residents are getting at. That this condition, as part of this approval, does not refer to the roundabout specifically, nor when the access route has to be in place, which frankly all too often is the last phase of the development, if indeed that last phase of the development proceeds. And the huge caveat that this is only should the connection through the third-party land come forward, rings big alarm bells. The last thing we want to see in this area is a similar situation to what we have just down the road from this development. Two adjacent developments having been promised a through route when the houses were sold, only to have a fence erected a few weeks ago, years after they moved in, blocking their previously quick and walkable access to a train station, a shop, and a school. I also note that Condition 8 in the report relating to a TRO needing to be in place before development begins has been moved into the Section 106 agreement. I'm not au fait with planning regulations in that sense, but I'd like to understand whether this change means that if this application is approved as it stands, development can begin without even making the lane safer by virtue of that TRO. I sincerely hope not. On behalf of the many residents who've contacted me, I implore the committee to reflect on proceeding to approve a 350 home development with effectively a single access point, which really is what it is. We've got two other points at which you can access Old Ryden Lane, really single entrance point here, of an increasingly busy road with little in the way of future guarantees of other access points. Access points that would allow safe navigation of a very residential area. I implore the committee to reject the application or amend the application in its current form to take into account the need for further or alternative access points. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the residents who've contacted me and the other ward councillors, and additionally to those who've given up their time to be here today.
Thank you, Joshua. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the committee if there are any. Josh, you happy to do that?
Oh, yeah, sorry, yes, yeah. Days now.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Can you comment on bus routes in the city, in how to the site and how it all links up, and how will people be able to get the bus and where would they end up?
So I do use the area pretty frequently. So I know if you're looking, if we're looking at the screen now, there's a bus route that you can get a bus from the other side of the roundabout. So again, if you had an access point at the IKEA roundabout, there's a bus route just on the other side of the roundabout there, which is perfectly convenient. The other one is you have to go all the way down the one-way road further into Newcourt. So when you turn off the roundabout to the south, right, and it would be off the screen here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. You kept my attention, and and you were very focused on it, and that was good. And clearly, you have a handle on what the local residents expect, because as you know, we're in a situation that this is an outline, and so really, I want to know if you can, and I'm not saying that you've straw polled them in this, and it's basically from talking to people. The principle of planning here or something being here is understood and accepted. However, it's about the access and the traffic and the potential dangers, whether perceived, factual, or whatever, that is involved in all of this. If
I would say that is accurate, definitely.
thank you. That's all I wanted to understand, where the problem lies.
Okay, based on that, you're done. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for coming in. Thanks for your first planning committee speech. We'll look
Thank you.
forward to many more.
Thanks.
It was very good, actually. Thank you very much. So I have a written statement from Councillor Ledbetter as well, who was not able to attend due to the date. I'm being very lenient because we've messed everybody about, so that's why I'm willing to accept this today. I write in my capacity as County Councillor to ask the committee to turn down the application based on a flawed road access strategy. I am supporting residents who have the necessary local knowledge in highlighting the dangers of using the access off Riding Lane. There is another access available, offered up, and in fact proved to be for this very development, and the developer needs to facilitate this. I would add that this is further unacceptable that the residents of Old Riding Lane will lose the ability to turn out of their road into Riding Lane. Therefore, this application should be refused or at worst deferred to allow further discussions on road access. Thank you from Councillor Ledbetter. You also apologise for not being here. I've missed that line. So we'll take that. I can't answer questions on that because it's not mine. So we'll move into debate.
No, nobody else to talk. Don't they all get a list of speakers as well?
Yeah, there's no one speaking, only Councillor Ellis Jones speaking against, and no one speaking in favour.
They don't have to come. Councillor Moore and Councillor Newby.
Thank you very much, Chair.
That's about, okay.
Thank you. As we've already heard, the principle of development is already established for this site. But I'm concerned that these access points and how the site relates to the wider area in terms of transport isn't very well thought through. There's been nothing mentioned. I mean, the MPPF does talk about public transport and buses, and the buses are quite a long way. And in the documentation, you know, they really demonstrate that this is not going to be a sustainable site in terms of how people have alternatives to using the car. So the car-led development is going to be locked in the one-way loop, and public transport just hasn't been thought about, and I'm really concerned about what I've heard about these access points. So I think the developer needs to think again, really.
Councillor Newby.
Thank you, Chair. It just frustrates me when the landowners have not been approached by the construction company. When they've been there and they've opened their doors up and said, look, come and chat with us. We'd like to talk about a much more safer access, because that roundabout does work, it's perfect, it slows the traffic down, it's easy access onto the 379. Why are they not here tonight to answer those questions?
You don't have to be.
Which makes me a little bit worried that they're not happy to negotiate with people. And I'm sure the people from Old Riding Lane are not NIMBYs. I'm getting nods. If they're not against the actual development, it's purely on the aspect of road safety. And two near fatals for me is too many. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Newby. Councillor Bialik.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And so I'd like to stay focused on this and what we're doing tonight. Many times we've agreed a outline planning permission. We brought reserved matters back, and I heard what you said, and so I'm hoping that the reserved matters or the final will come back. So it is right, good. That's a good thing. So that assures people that we're not saying here's carte blanche to people. But it's quite clear there are a number of concerns about the traffic and everything else. And Ben, when I say you, I don't mean you, but I mean you haven't convinced people. And the problem is just saying, well, it's okay, we're happy with it, we're that and then. We have to recognise that a lot of people are not happy with it. So we've been in a situation before where we've approved the outline, which has accepted access. We've had the reserve matters back, and we've had lots of representations which have all focused about the highways. And we've had to sit here and say, well, that's all been agreed, we can't do nothing about that, which is a shame. So clearly, to me, more work needs to be done, not just to convince, but to actually explore to see what the alternatives are. And like Councillor Moore, I too have cycled up and down there. And I have to say, I've clearly lived in Tottenham, so I know the area very well. And what people have enjoyed in the past and now what it's potentially going to look like. So is there a way, I need some advice from the officers, that if we do accept the principle, if not the outline, of that something is going to happen here. But clearly we need to put in place proper consulted and engage with the people, the local members and everything else about access to all the possible options on the highways. And then can we get all that back here as well? I need some advice on that, because if that was the case, and if that was conditioned to come back in the reserve matters, so more work to do, more engagement, because I think it's very, very important. It is so important because this isn't just the first time that we've, I won't say fallen for it, but this has happened to us, and I'd rather not see it. I hope I've made just a little bit of sense, Chair.
I'm going to let the head of service answer that for you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the situation we've got with this application is that it is an outline application with the determination on the highway issues or points of access being decided now. We are obliged to make a decision on the basis of the application before us. You could have the option to defer in the hope that you can discuss this with the applicant and that they listen to your concerns and come back with something else. But there is also the risk that they could say no and will appeal against non-determination, and it would go to appeal. And we have clear advice from the Highway Authority on the basis of their expertise. The application before us is acceptable. So you're risking an appeal, which we would have to defend without any clear expertise on highway grounds, other than that it's okay.
You may.
Supplement to that. I mean, my gut feeling is what is the point of us being here then? That's my first reaction to that. Just as well stay at home and watch everything else. But there is every point for us to be here, Roger. We are to be here. So it sounds to me now, and I need some advice, if we were to, just humour me for a moment, if we were to defer to continue the discussions around the highways thing, is that going to impact about time for determination or whatever? Because I really do feel, and if these developers really and truly want to work with us, they will pick up the mood, which we all clearly have, and from Councillor Ellis Jones is quite clear. There is a mood, and we have to reflect that, even though sometimes it doesn't make sense to those people, it makes sense to us and the people. You've got to carry people with you when you do these things, otherwise it's always going to be a thing. So if there is some time, and I'm afraid if that means us coming back here again soon, that's what I was elected to do, and that's what I need to do. Well, we'll have to do that. So I really think we need a little bit of something around this highways thing, because everybody agrees, from what I can sense, is nobody's objecting to the fact that something's going to happen here. It's about that, Chair. So that is how I've picked up the mood of everything here this afternoon.
I would say I completely agree with you. I think the mood is that, and I think both the officers will let you know that when this was brought to Chair's briefing, I went, really, that junction? Because that's everybody's reaction to it. What we know, and it's why I deliberately very clearly asked Ben the question, is that the Highways Authority, as the authority, say that road's okay. No matter what we think, they say it's okay. So we can either refuse this application, it goes to appeal, we would have to defend that ourselves against Highways advice, which, to be honest, we'd probably lose. We can defer the application, but that would assume that the developers felt that would be beneficial to them. I'm not entirely sure that they will think that. And the issue with the deferral is that it may take the entire process out of our hands and that it will go to appeal and we'll have to defend that having not made a decision, or we can approve the application. Those are your three options. And my worry with deferral is we get no say in why we would have chosen to refuse it, because they will take it to appeal.
On point of procedure, Chair, would it not impact? I mean, because we're going to have reserved matters, there's going to be further discussions anyway about this on reserved matters. So all that's going to come back to us on reserved matters. So we're not delaying anything in relation to that. Why can't the highways thing come back at the same time after and deal with it at the reserved matters? Why can't? I mean, what I'm saying is there must be time, and it's quite clear we've got to do something about this, Chair.
I'm happy for you as a committee to do whatever you want, but if I'm being cynical, and I often am, it will cost a lot more money for that junction. I'm not sure deferral is going to benefit you anything. So I would say if you're going to go down that route, you might as well refuse, but we'll lose the appeal either way. No, that's my opinion. That's me giving into the debate. You lot may all feel differently, but my knowledge of this application is that I don't agree with what Devon County Council are saying, but I don't think we'll find an expert that doesn't feel the way they do, based on the MPPF. I've got a lot of people on the list before Councillor Knight. I've also got still Councillor Barshin to speak, Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Lights in the list. So we'll move on, and then Councillor Jobson at the end of that. So if we go with Marina.
Thank you, Chair. I think probably I'm not going to add much to the conversation from what's already been said. I would happily vote for this if the highways issue was changed. Otherwise, no, I'm not sorry, but it's dangerous. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. As has already been stated, I think summed up by Councillor Bialik and by yourself, that whatever we do, we are stuck. If we say no, there's a potential losing an appeal and the costs on that. If we say yes, the developer is happy with what this has done, this is a low cost option, and the community have to live with the hazard that this is for them for the future years until something happens and the county then wake up and make the changes that should have been made in the first place. Clearly what we need here is the developer to engage, and particularly engage with the owner of the third area of land and buy that piece of land to connect to the roundabout and resolve the problem. If this developer wishes to work with us as the local authority, we think they would want to sign some good faith that they want to work with the community in which they're living and building upon. And it does seem to me that if we say no, we lose. If we say yes, as you point out, we lose. The only option where we've got any room for maneuver is some form of deferment to allow a debate to take place between the county, ourselves, and the developer to see if there's any movement. We must do it for the sake of the community.
I would really like to support this application. I like the idea of that many homes for people, not just for people, for families, with decent provisions, you know, with space for kids to play. I think it's a good site for that kind of development, but I have to echo what everybody else has said, that the roads have to be safe, that we should listen to people in the community about those access points. I understand that we're in a really difficult position and we're probably going to lose either way, but I think that deferral is our best case scenario. We're hoping that the developer does hear people's concerns, maybe if residents are reaching out and saying things that might make a difference, and that they might just, you know, the small chance that they might just come back and fix that problem, in which case if they did, this is a brilliant opportunity for that area, for Exeter, 350 homes, a nice place to live in. I've walked around this area many times. I'm a non-driver, but those roads still concern me, just as someone with small children who crosses those roads. So yeah, I would vote for a deferral.
Councillor Jobson?
I too would support deferral. I think there is something in our favour on this. Firstly, I know they don't have to, but one would have anticipated a developer on a major application like this would have come along and supported their application. They could then have been asked the very simple question, why have you not engaged with a third party and are you willing to do so? We don't know the answer to that question because they're not here. It is important. That is where the buses are, as we have heard. That is a much safer access point. It would be, you know, they could appeal, yes, but it's a very simple point they have to deal with. Why won't they talk to the third party landowner who's indicated in writing, it's on the council comments columns, that they are prepared to negotiate? Now, they might want a ridiculous price and the developer can then come back and say, well, we did try, but they wanted far too much money for it. So I don't think there is any harm to be done by deferral, and there could be a huge amount of benefit to existing residents and new residents.
Chair, I'm happy to move if it helps move it along and then and move a deferral on the understanding. I don't know what will happen at the end. I'm not surmising. I'm just hoping that hey, somebody may just think about it. But
I second that, Chair.
Yeah, you can. Councillor Moore, did you want to say anything that will change the outcome of that movement?
No, I just wanted to re-emphasise the point which I've just looked up, the National Planning Policy Framework around sustainable sites, which talks about, because this is only linking to access points. And I think that any discussion with the developer really has to talk about all modes of transport, not just car travel. So the cycle routes, the links to the buses, and also the rail station, which is nearby. And then NPPF talks about offering a genuine choice of transport modes. So that is the discussion that we really have to have, because this is not cutting it.
Based on the amendment, motion, proposal, I don't know, before me, to defer before me, which has been raised and seconded, can I see all those in favour, please?
It's unanimous.
Thank you. That item has been deferred. I would hope that the county council are also going to engage in the conversations that have moved forward. Thank you very much for your time there. I'll just give everybody a minute while we clear the room of those people from the Topsham area. Okay.
Who's in charge of
Not get Roger on the microphone for a minute. If everybody's back in the room, now everyone's going to keep moving.
Cheers. Yeah, I don't think you can use the concept. It's too bright. Yeah.
Are we ready to move on yet? Anyone?
Yeah.
Talk amongst yourself for a minute. Right, next item on the agenda is agenda item 6, I think, which is the demolition of a garage workshop and construction of 3-storey plus abatement purpose-built student accommodation between 68 and 72 Howe Road. And I think Roger is presenting for us today. Oh yes, Councillor Mitchell would like to declare an interest in
under the conduct of members of committees, I would like to clear the potential that my well-being might be affected by this application, according to Article 8 and Article 9 of our declaration, that someone might believe because I live in close proximity to this, 70 yards away from it, I have no financial interest, but according to our standing orders for code of conduct, that a person might believe that my well-being might be affected the way I vote in debate. So therefore, I'd like to recuse myself, but use the opportunity given under standing orders to just have 3 minutes to speak.
If you'd like to go and join the audience as you're about to become part of it, that would be great.
Yep.
And we'll call you when it's time, Councillor Mitchell. Back over to you, Roger.
Ready?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the demolition of the garage workshop and the construction of a 26-bed student accommodation unit. This is the site plan, the red line. So the garage sits, takes up most of the site, that sits towards the back of the site, which fronts onto Howell Road and backs onto property in Blackwell Road. And to the east there, it says PH, it's not a pub anymore, it used to be a pub, that's a dwelling. And to the west, there is a relatively modern flat development. Here we see the same thing from an aerial view, so you can see the garage building taking up most of the site with parking area in front of it. And some photographs showing the context of the building in the street scene. And this is just a photograph showing typical terrace housing near to the site, which is relevant when you see the design of the proposal. So the site plan shows proposed building sitting on the site frontage. This positioning has come about as a consequence of some fairly significant negotiations between officers and the applicant. Originally, the building sat further back in the site, with a B&T space behind. Same thing from an aerial perspective. And so it's a series of floor basement plan, which has got residential units which face onto the amenity space and shared accommodation, shared living space to the east side. And then you've got a series of floor plans of similar arrangement going up the building. And this is the front elevation, which, as you can see, has been designed to fit into the street scene, and is similar in style to the existing terraced houses that you can see there. That's the view from the back. So you can see it's got a basement level, so it looks taller from the back. And sorry, that's the garage, the existing garage to be demolished. Yeah.
Through the chair, Councillor Byron.
So you can see a contextual street scene elevation, so you can see the height and style of the building in the context of the height of surrounding buildings, both in Howell Road and in the road behind. So it's a height very similar to the prevailing character of the height of buildings around it. The key issues on this site are the principle of student accommodation, the amenity of neighbours, and design and heritage impact to conservation area. These issues are dealt with in some detail in the report. I think the key one, and the one that's likely to generate the most discussion today, is the principle of student accommodation here. And we spent a long time debating this and the relationship of the proposal to policies in our local plan and in the St James neighbourhood plan. And the conclusion is that there is no justification for refusal. So the recommendation is for approval subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roger. Right, I have got, which way around do I do this? I've got two councillors speaking understanding orders. Oh no, you haven't got to ask any questions, have you? There you go. Would you like to ask a question?
I wouldn't mind. Roger, you went through the neighbourhood plan and you said you couldn't see buildings. Can you just elaborate on what gives you, well, I don't mean it in that way, tell us how you've come to that conclusion, just very quickly. If it's in the papers, I just like it nice and quick. If you said it's this, that, and the other, yeah, fine. But just some quick reasons on why none of that applies.
Yes, of course.
Allows you to say yes to this.
Yeah.
That'd be fine.
So policy H5 of the local plan deals with purpose-built accommodation for students, and it it says basically that the scale and intensity should not harm the scale and intensity of use should not harm the character of the locality. The proposal should not create an over-concentration of the use in any one area of the city, which would change the character of the neighbourhood or create an imbalance in the local community. And student accommodation should be located so as to limit the need to travel to the campus by car. Now, the key one there is part B, which is the proposal should not create an over-concentration of the use in any one area of the city that would change the character of the neighbourhood or create an imbalance in the local community. And this is the bit I've been consulting carefully with my policy colleagues about, who have advised me that in the absence of a clear definition of community imbalance, then there would be a risk on appeal of not being able to demonstrate a community imbalance and a poor chance of success on appeal if this was refused. I'll just move on to the St James neighbourhood plan, which also has a policy about large-scale purpose-built student accommodation and gives 3 criteria where proposals would be acceptable. Firstly, in areas that are not predominantly characterised by intact streets of traditional terraced, semi-detached and detached forms of 2 to 3 story residential development. Now, I think the case here is it's not intact at the moment because there is a garage of fairly unattractive character in the middle of the street in a conservation area, and this would actually mend that street scene by introducing something that's more in character with the character of the conservation area. Secondly, it needs to be where servicing and parking requirements could be achieved with no unacceptable impact on the amenity of the adjacent area for residents. And in this case, the servicing, there is no parking proposed. I don't think there needs to be any here, and it can be achieved without the actual design, without any problems arising from parking issues. And thirdly, where the scale and massing of the accommodation would be broadly similar to that surrounding buildings. It is in keeping with the surrounding buildings. So it's our view that it complies with policy C2 of the St James neighbourhood plan.
Just a supplementary is, does this area have a residence parking area around all of that?
This does.
So those no new residence permits would be allocated to these.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
That's all right.
Thank you. Just want to clarify your statement on community balance. How has the council previously determined community balance? Because it's been a long-standing policy that we've had, so we must have made decisions previously on some sort of percentage or makeup or nature of the community in order to determine community balance.
We looked at this, and the only scheme I can find that's been refused on those grounds was in Wells Street, which was a very similar proposal to this one. And it's I've asked my policy colleagues why we reached that conclusion in that case, and were unable to explain. This 7 years ago, I wasn't personally involved. It's clear in the current circumstances that we don't believe we are able to justify community imbalance or elaborate on it. That wasn't challenged on appeal, that Wells Street decision. So sorry, I'm unable to help you further.
I think we might have done it as well with the Exeter City Football Club when they wanted to add more rooms, not the football club, but that development. And again, it wasn't challenged. Was it challenged? I didn't think it was challenged on appeal.
They got the original through, but then they reduced numbers.
So the application for more numbers, we then refused on that ground, and they didn't appeal that decision again. So I'm guessing it's never been challenged is the answer to that, and we've maybe been lucky.
Councillor Jobson.
Thank you. Policy SD3, of course, in the St James neighbourhood plan talks about the provision in infill and windfall sites. This is definitely infill for affordable homes as a clear policy. They also are very clear that the vision of the neighbourhood plan was to ensure that it was a balanced community, and over the years it has gone from being, I think, 48 students to being nearer 60% students. So there is a huge lack of balance in that community, and also like if this is granted, it's going to be even further imbalanced. So one would have thought that if you looked at SD3 in the vision of the neighbourhood plan, that there are reasons to object. A couple of questions of clarification, if I may, at the same time. Thank you. In page 84 of the report indicates that business rates would be paid. Now, as far as I'm aware, it's student HMOs, which this is, and PBSAs, which are the bigger buildings, don't pay business rates. So I just wondered whether there had been a wonderful change in policy and that we could now start charging business rates on all these, which would be wonderful. And secondly, I think there was one other thing. Oh no, that's it. No, thank you very much.
On that point, I think that's an error in the report, and I apologise.
What a shame.
If no one else has got any questions now, I'll call the speakers up. So first of all, speaking on stacked in order, number 44, we've got Councillor Pearce and Councillor Mitchell. Do you have a decision on which way you're going to appear? Thank you very much, Councillor Mitchell. First of all, you know you don't have a time limit, but 3 minutes was really good for Councillor Ellis-Jones.
Doesn't like me, does it? Okay. Right, yeah. Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to be here for slightly more than 3 minutes, I'm afraid. I'll start off by saying that sadly, when reading this report, its content, its conclusions, and its recommendations, I became quite perplexed, mainly by what was not by what was contained in it, but what was omitted to be contained within it, or what it chose not to state. I'll amplify that in a minute as I go on. Therefore, I'm afraid I need to challenge its conclusions, and I am predominantly also here to protect and support the principles of the Exeter St James Neighbourhood Plan. Firstly, 16.0 of the report discusses the principle of development. It cites policy CP5 of the Exeter Core Strategy, which was published in 2012, and in particular paragraph 6.28 of that policy, which states that 75% of new student accommodation since that date should be provided in purpose-built student accommodation. It goes on to state this principle has not been met. But what the report fails to do is present any context. So I would refer members back to the Planning Member Working Group report of the 18th of October 2022, and in particular highlight paragraphs 4.3 to 4.6 of that report. In that document, there is detail, there is commentary, and there are facts. Those facts are that yes, at this precise moment, 64% of additional student numbers are housed within purpose-built student accommodation. But due to existing consents for purpose-built student accommodation, mainly on the university's Clydesdale site, and the university itself projecting its student numbers to fall between now and 2026/27, the report demonstrates that the 75% target will be met by 2024/25 at 75.4% and will increase to 79.8% in 2025/26 and 83.8% in 2026/27. Why no mention of this commentary within this report? I, however, accept more than 75% could be provided, but surely once we have hit the target, which was above, which with the above context we have, we would look at protecting areas that already have a high proportion of student housing in favour of areas that do not. So, is there really a justification for this accommodation in this location? Secondly, the report discusses Exeter's local plan policy H5B. which states the proposal will not create an overconcentration of the use in any one area of the city, which would change the character of the neighbourhood or create an imbalance in the local community. This statement is very clear, and the recent Planning Member Working Group report, again of the 18th of October 2022, states that 47% of properties within the St James Neighbourhood Plan area are student housing. So there is clearly an imbalance, yet this report states that policy H5B, community imbalance, has not been defined by the council. But this is simply inaccurate. The supplementary planning document, Houses in Multiple Occupation, in brackets including Class C4 uses, was agreed by the Council's executive on the 5th of July 2011. 5.1 of the document states, with effect from the 1st of January 2012, the Council is proposing to resist any further changes of the use to houses of multiple occupation within the areas shown, and it was striked in Plan 1, where the proportion of homes exempt from council tax already exceeds 20%. In other words, the council will regard a proportion greater than 20% as an overconcentration of HMO use for the purposes of policy H5B. 3.1 of the Planning Member Report on the 10th of July 2012 states the decision to apply a threshold of 20% in the draft and adopted SPD was carefully considered, including with reference to experience elsewhere, and responded to public concerns that an earlier threshold of 25% in the SPG, adopted in 2008, was too high. So once again, 20% was mentioned in that document. 2.2 of the executive report in January 2014 stated the adopted SPD identified that proposals for HMOs would be resisted where the proportion of properties exempt from council tax due to entire occupation by full-time students exceeded 20% in a ward or part of a ward covered by the Article 4 direction that permitted development rights for changes of use of C3. So once again, it mentions 20%. The Article 4 Direction Review report, which was only discussed a few weeks ago, also clearly commented on a 20% potential threshold. And also, I'm sure members would have seen the planning inspector's decision recently for an appeal on 4 Dinham Road. In his decision, he spells out the vulnerability of our existing policies, but he does reference 20% as the level within the policy that causes imbalance within a community. He, however, highlighted that Dinham Road had not hit that threshold, hence why his appeal was allowed. According to the Planning Member Working Group report last year, Howe Road in its entirety has 27% HMOs, although most of the HMOs are concentrated adjacent to or near the proposed site tonight. And the St James Neighbourhood Plan area, as already stated, has 47% of HMOs. So in my view, it would be reasonable to expect an inspector to accept an imbalance already exists in this location. So I am perplexed by the report this evening, as clearly the council has defined overconcentration, and there is clearly an overconcentration within the neighbourhood of St James. So therefore, this application should be rejected. Thirdly, and finally, you'll be glad to hear, Chair, the report only talks about the Neighbourhood Plan Policy C2, and therefore does not give the context of the plan as a whole. It also gives a barrister's opinion, which, remember, was provided by the applicant and arguably takes the plan as a whole out of context. So let's talk about the neighbourhood plan, which was adopted via a referendum with 91.6% in favour of its adoption. Particular reference should be made to its section on community and the preamble which starts on page 25, which explains the overarching aim of the plan for a balanced community. It states, the term community balance therefore refers to the desire of the residents of St James to have a diverse population, which includes people of all stages of their lives and which is not dominated by one single group of the population. Exeter City Council has defined balance, this is within St James Neighbourhood Plan, stating we've already defined balance using the number of council tax exemptions in a given area as a proxy for HMO and student accommodation. When over 20% of properties is in a defined area are council tax exempt, it is generally considered that additional HMOs would change the character of the area and undermine and maintain a balanced and mixed community. The same principles apply to purpose-built student accommodation as they do HMOs, because they both create an imbalance within that community. Despite what is claimed, this application within the report would cause a further imbalance and is contrary to the neighbourhood plan's overarching aims, so should be rejected. Therefore, I believe there is no further need for purpose-built student accommodation within this locality, so the application should be resisted. B, clear evidence of an imbalance within the community, which means is already in place, which means this application should be rejected. And C, this application is contrary to the overarching aims of the Exeter St James Neighbourhood Plan, so again should be resisted. And my colleagues will be speaking later and will go into detail about other reasons why this application should be rejected, but I wanted to outline my objections to the principle of student development on this site. So please reject this application tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Does anyone have any questions? He's been here often enough to assume an answer them. No questions for Councillor Mitchell. Right then, Councillor Pearce, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to thank Councillor Mitchell for starting the debate and getting the first shots fired, really, because that's what we do. This is a battle. We've got to defend with every method we can the neighbourhood plan of St James. And I think it was really interesting to hear Councillor Mitchell discuss dates. Because I think I just want to highlight to you all now that under section 38 brackets 5 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, it states that if a policy contained in a development plan or an area conflicts with another, the conflict must be resolved in favour of the last documents to be adopted, approved or published. The last documents to be adopted, approved or published, which happened after a referendum where there was over 93% in favour, was the St James Neighbourhood Plan. So therefore, the policies contained within that supersede the existing City Council local plan. So all the evidence within the report, which references the local plan as opposed to the neighbourhood plan and the presumption and in favour of this development, should be completely disregarded. The second point I wish to bring your attention to, and this again is something that Councillor Mitchell touched upon, is that included in this application was a barrister's opinion. Having read that and looked at it, I can think it is only there to try and intimidate and get this committee to follow a course of action that that person has been paid for. This is not an independent opinion. This is an opinion sought and paid for, and within the parameters of the developer who wishes to push through with disregard for the St James neighbourhood plan here. So again, I want you to completely disregard that barrister's opinion and the threats contained within it. So moving on to my arguments now, really, and these relate to the neighbourhood plan, the most recent, and therefore the only plan which we should be taking into account in this matter. SD3, infill sites. I think it was raised earlier by Councillor Jobson. That's exactly what this is, a windfall or infill site. And the application just completely rides roughshod over the principles outlined within that. This is not affordable housing. It's not even high quality private residential housing. This is, it looks beautiful, maybe it might be in keeping with the street scene, but this is purpose built student accommodation, or is it HMO? I'm not quite sure on this one. I don't think the developer was quite sure either. But what I am sure of is that it is not affordable housing for local residents or high quality private residential. So therefore on those points it falls, and this application should be refused just upon that point. I don't want to go into too much more because I'm conscious that the other councillor Mitchell has also got to speak, and it's getting quite late, and the chair may not be too happy if we're all labouring the same points. But I'd just like to highlight again a similar application which has already been referenced this evening, and that was a garage, an infill, a windfall site previously on Wells Street, where it was turned down because of community imbalance. Now that decision was viewed by those developers as being robust and defendable to such an extent that they did not try and appeal or challenge it. So, and I think we can look at this area here and say that it is also, just as the Wells Street area is, completely imbalanced. Not only with the existing student accommodation that is all there, the existing HMOs, and good evidence from this is the base that Councillor Mitchell talked about from the planning member working group report, but also the fact that when the Article 4 direction was first brought forward in this area, a street that lives closer than the other Councillor Mitchell, who had to declare an interest, was exempted because it was already imbalanced. So that's less, 50 yards away from there. So this council agrees, and its policies state that there is an imbalance in this community. This would further exacerbate it. So please refuse this application. Thank you. I'm quite happy to take questions if there are any.
Any questions? Thank you, Councillor Hare. I'm going to enjoy the next bit. Councillor Michael Mitchell, as a member of the public, is coming to speak for 3 minutes.
I think it might be about a minute after my 2 excellent contributions from my colleagues, so I do apologise if some of it might appear slightly repetitive, but I've been editing as I go along, so keep it short and sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Howard. You start your stopwatch. First of all, thanks to my colleagues. I'd like to speak in support of a refusal for this application. This application, if approved, has the ability to undermine key elements of the neighbourhood plan and policy 5HB of the local plan, and I believe would open the path for further recommended approvals in other wards in the city. I think we ought to put on thanks the 80 members of the community and groups who have commented, and many of them in depth. And that is not, I don't think, reflected in the report compared to the report on the previous application we discussed this evening. I feel many of the points in the application are opinion, and they should be subject to your critical analysis. There's a statement on the application form that this area is dominated by student housing. In fact, Hull Road is a road made up of both long-term residents and students. It is a mixed community. As has already been indicated, the 9 houses adjacent to this building are HMOs. That would mean within this 100 meters, I should now say in modern language, the impact is that we're doubling the number of students occupying that particular small area of a street. And that will have consequences for community balance in our area. The local community are not opposed to redevelopment of this site. It's the nature and the impact of the redevelopment that is a concern, and that particularly in regard to community balance and the conflict with the neighbourhood plan. 2 previous applications are worth considering. the 2016 Well Street application, which, as we said, was on a garage site in a terraced area, which we refused as an authority, stating the reasons were 2CA of the Exeter Neighbourhood Plan and Policy 5HB of the local plan. There is stated in writing. No appeal has taken place. You must ask yourself, why didn't the developer, on an expensive site with 96 potential student accommodation rooms, appeal? Presumably they thought our decision was sound. If that decision was sound in 2016, why is that decision not sound in 2023 in a parallel site on a garage in a similar site? The other application I'd like you to think about is in regard to Hooper Street, in part of our Article 4 directive area, 50 metres away from this particular site, where there was a former Victorian school, which then became a warehouse, and an application was placed before this committee in 2018 for 4 infill 2-bedroom terraced houses. Now built, now occupied, houses, not accommodation. There were 2 comments on that application, not 80 as per this one, and both of them were positive, but were only concerned about the nature of the building plans as they developed, because they were compliant with the local plan and the neighbourhood plan. Like many other communities, we need more housing, not more short-term accommodation. Somebody asked me a question about parking. I'd love to comment. Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Talk to us about transport and access.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that question. The issue I was going to raise, there are several, I think, issues specifically with this application besides the general policy. And one is this concept of car-free developments and no parking. Many of you are aware there are multiple thousands of permits held in Exeter by university students. Having a car-free development doesn't stop people bringing cars. We've got a specific problem in this road in that already a large area is devoted to residential parking. There is no spare capacity in the street. It is suggested in this application that we give up the existing yellow lines outside the garage, and that will provide additional parking. Yes, that would provide additional parking. But the position is, and the highway have not commented on this, or the fire service, is that Castlemount Fire Station is further along the road, and this is a main access road for the fire service. If you fill in the parking that is currently not available outside the garage site, you're going to get a situation where from Horse Guards, the entrance to Horse Guards Estate, to Prison Lane will effectively be a one-way street, and it will restrict the access of the fire service. And I'm surprised no comment has been made about that in relation to that additional point that appeared about parking. In regard to cycling, etc., there is provision on site. I will say currently there are very few cycles, there are far more cars in our area, but parking for residents is already a critical issue for many local residents, because we've got a lot of long-term parking where cars stay for long periods of time and are not moved.
Everyone else happy? In that case, Councillor Mitchell, thank you very much. You may return and talk the next item. Thank you. Next person speaking is a member of the public speaking to object, and that's Robin Connett. Thank you, Robin. I'm afraid you only get 3 minutes as well.
Beat the bell. Do I have to press something?
No, you're
I'm
on.
on.
It's ready to go. It's not making a noise.
Ready? As a citizen of Exeter, I feel duty bound to alert you to the fact that on this occasion, the report in front of you has very serious flaws. Hence, the recommendation provided for your guidance is unsound. It denies the legal status of St James Neighbourhood Plan and is non-compliant with National Planning Policy Framework. It's in breach of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. It fails even to consider the Neighbourhood Plan in reaching its recommendation. It fails to consider, analyse, assess, or even acknowledge the claims of Exeter St James Forum as a statutory consultee that the application is non-compliant with 4 development plan policy clauses. It quotes from a barrister's opinion of policy C2 obtained by the applicant, but there's no mention of this opinion in any of the published documentation. After the prior unexplained insertion of the wording of this policy, the report claims that the applicant has demonstrated compliance with all three clauses, abrogating the duty of the planning authority to present its own unbiased professional assessment. In any case, the applicant made no mention of this policy in any published documents, let alone attempt to show compliance. It appears the barrister must have misread the policy wording in reaching a clearly flawed conclusion, but the report fails to address this. The report quotes the barrister's frightener, a warning of costs following appeal should the application be refused, and this suggests that the director has succumbed to this appalling and unsound threat. Clearly, these very serious claims cannot be addressed in 3 minutes, but I shall be happy to respond to questions for clarification and justification. In the time left, please consider one clause of Policy C2 that, according to the barrister, requires that the planning permission be granted, but the opposite is true. C2 defines locations under which PBSA of 10 beds or more may be permitted. C2A states that these are locations that are not predominantly characterised by intact streets of traditional terraced, semi-detached, detached forms of 2 to 3 storey residential development. You don't have to take my word for it that this counts Hull Road out. The director's report states the housing in this area comprises rows of 2 and 3 storey terraced housing with few gaps between buildings. The architect's own description states Hull Road is largely residential, and it lists the key features as moderate to high density, generally terraced, with limited instances of semi-detached and detached dwellings, and predominantly 2.5 storey in the immediate vicinity of the site, and with a mix of 2 and 2.5 storey in the wider area. QED, this site is one that is ruled out by C2A as acceptable for a large PBSA. For the sake of meeting legal requirements, as well as to avoid further endangering the fragile social sustainability of St James, please refuse this application. Thank you.
No, that's fine. Yeah. And finally, could I have Fiona Jones, I believe, speaking in favour of the application?
Okay.
You get 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And we'll hear when you went out.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Fiona Jones, and I'm the planning consultant supporting the application for this site. And the applicant is here tonight, unlike the other application. Over 1,000 days ago, back in May 2020, the applicant sought pre-application advice for the development of this site as a PBSA. We have always had the support of the planning department for this site as a PBSA. The Wells Street scheme that's been referred to earlier was for 96 units, while this is only for 26, so it's a significantly smaller scheme to that. The St James's neighbourhood plan made in 10 years ago accepted that student accommodation would be required in this area, given that it is so close to the university. There has been, obviously, you've heard there's been objection that local residents state that it is contrary to the neighbourhood plan. And as you've heard, we did seek advice from a barrister on this point. And he could have obviously said, no, the residents are right and you're wrong, but he didn't. He's assessed the application and concluded that development site is an infill site, it's a gap that would be restored by the development. And as you know, the site has been identified as a building which doesn't make a positive contribution to the character of the conservation area. In this sense, the planning committee would be properly entitled in law to evaluate criteria A of policy C2 as being satisfied, because the location of the development is not an intact street, but it is a street which is not intact as it contains a gap, that is the development site. I won't go in much further on because I think you've all read the committee report and you'll know what the barrister's opinion said. But clearly he has indicated that if it's refused tonight, that a cost application would be awarded in our favour, given the compliance with the neighbourhood plan and the local plan as a whole, and also the National Planning Policy Framework, which obviously is the most recent and up-to-date policy dating from 2021, which supports the objective to significantly boost the supply of houses, and that does include student housing as set out in paragraph 62. This scheme is not a barometer for the wider debate about the university, students and the city. The scheme you see before you has had extensive input from many different members of the planning department. Since the original submission, the number of student bed spaces has been reduced and the size, bulk and massing has also been altered. Every change that the planning department has asked for has been accommodated by the applicant. The scheme is better for their input and expertise.
Thank you.
Okay.
I've got Councillor Barrett for a question and then Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. And so what I'm hearing is, it's like we're just doing battle on two arguments here, and that reflects society at the moment. We're polarised. But actually, I have no love of the old garage.
No.
Okay. Although maybe somewhere, as we get rid of petrol cars, somebody will list a garage somewhere, because we will most probably want it.
That one.
But they won't list that one.
No.
So anything's going to look better.
Yeah.
Fine. I assume you've had consultations, not just with the planning department, as important as you guys are, but perhaps with the local community. And I would have thought, and if you can answer me, that you may have had a little bit of resistance to all of this when you were talking to people. I'm just thinking of that. And wouldn't your developer like to actually say, do you know what, a bit like what was mentioned about the other development of the infill, to say, do you know what, I'm actually making a contribution to that, and I'm actually going to change that, and would they consider changing that to whatever the configuration would be, to actually get a number of homes in there, which for residential use? Because I think you can get the feeling that you're going to get a long way. I'm not going to argue, Chair, with them about the highways thing, because if they were to do that, you're going to have all these highway fire engines going up and down. I don't want to argue that. But would the developer consider going away? And I know you're going to say it's all about this, but wouldn't you be prepared to go away and actually say, yeah, we could change it to residential, some nice flats for homes for people in Exeter?
Well, the developer is here tonight, as I said. Yeah, do you want?
Developer can speak from you, but he can't.
No, well, that's what I thought.
So you can shout at you.
I mean, as I said, we came to the planning department in lockdown in 2020, in May 2020, with this scheme.
That's another era.
I know, it feels like that, but that's how long that we've been talking to the planning department about this, and we have never had any objection to developing this site for this purpose. And so clearly the developer we've carried on with that, and I accept, it's not until obviously the application is put out into the public domain that then, people then start objecting about it. And maybe well, I don't want to speak.
You could all go home happy tonight.
Yeah, but the application obviously in front of you is for what it is, and I think all the comments have been heard. So, but obviously we like to think that it is policy compliant and has got your obviously full-hearted support from your head of service. So,
Councillor Moore, then Councillor Jobson, please.
Thank you. You quoted section 62 of the National Policy Planning Framework, and that talks about mixed communities, about students and families with children, affordable housing, older people, students, people with disabilities, service families and travellers and such like. And the next paragraph actually talks about the objective to be able to create mixed and balanced communities. So I'm just interested to hear your view about, it's been quite clearly set out about the context that the neighbourhood plan provides in terms of its purpose, and of course the neighbourhood plan is an equal status to the local plan in law. So how do you feel that your application contributes to the mixed and balanced community as set out by clause 62 and 63? Thank you.
Well, I think clause 63, paragraph 63 is referring to affordable housing. And 62 obviously includes students as there's a long list of groups of people that obviously need somewhere to live. And I don't have any evidence, and the policy that states that 75% or more of additional student numbers could be accommodated within PBSA within the city. So we were just really going along that line of the need for purpose-built student accommodation in this area. It's obviously a very sort of poor site that needs redevelopment. And that was the consideration that was put by the developer to provide a really nice building with.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to keep this moving on. Councillor Jobson, I've been really lenient with you two, but you both asked very long questions. So if you, I know you're a barrister and it's hard, but if you can make it
a very short question. I just wanted to know whether you had discussed any of these ideas that are in your plan with the Berry Meadow Residents Association or the Exeter St James Forum.
No.
Did you think it was worthwhile?
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your time. You can go back now. Thank you. Right, so I just want to clarify a few things. First of all, Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Headquarters have been consulted on this application and raised no objection, and will look at the building regs that it goes through. So I think that takes away the car parking statement from earlier. The Article 4 direction figures very clearly referred only to PBSA, and they didn't. There was no reference made to PBSA in that, and it's slightly unfair to use those statistics. The other ones I accept, but the Article 4 direction, which also has not gone through the full process of full council yet, is still sort of in a bit of a limbo. But you may have messed with the figures a little on that one. The rest of them I'm willing to accept. And my final comment would be that we have our solicitor, our planning solicitor with us, who did look at the barrister's letter, and I would like some sort of legal response to it, because there's been a lot of accusations made, and I think I'd like to hear what we think as a local authority on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have read the opinion. The opinion was given following reading of the officer's report, and so the opinion essentially responds to the point that is raised in the report that the members will have read, and so does agree, along with the recommendation that's been made tonight, that it complies with the policies C2, H5B, as well as just highlights some the fact that policy C3, which hasn't been referred to tonight, isn't relevant, and so yes, I have read it, and he does agree with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. I just wanted to make that clear, because there's been a lot of things said about the barrister's letter, and that we haven't sought our own advice on this, and we have. So I just wanted to clear that. Now I'm going to move into debate with every. Oh no, Roger would like to say something.
I just, if members are happy, I'd just like to bring things together. So clearly, the issues that look, there's one key issue here, and that is the issue of community imbalance and the impact of this proposal on it. And I also want to make it very clear that I cannot find any policies in the St James neighbourhood plan that address that issue that would justify us refusing it using a policy out of the St James plan. And as you know, you have to cite specific policies in your reasons for refusal. There's been some reference to policy SD3, which is about infill sites, and that policy actually says proposals to develop infill or midfill sites for affordable homes will be supported. This isn't a proposal for affordable homes. That policy doesn't apply to this proposal. The policy that does apply to this proposal is C2, which we've been over already, for student accommodation. I don't think that we can rely on the St James neighbourhood plan to determine this application in terms of justifying refusal. So we're left with policy H5 of the local plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right then, Councillor Bialik, you're ready to go?
Yeah, because I've heard what you said, but this is the members have the right to respond to all of this and put this forward. And so I'm not talking about car parks or fire engines or whether a bus goes up and down there. I don't think it's relevant to all of this. I want to talk about some of the issues that Councillor Mitchell's and Councillor Prowse raised in relation to the plan and what you mentioned just now. I get what you're saying, Roger. And so what I would want to know, and this, I'm just thinking it just may help the discussion. Is there grounds if we chose, and we haven't finished the debate yet, if we chose to refuse it, and you always want reasons for refusal, if we said, well, our reasons are for refusal exactly as what is being demonstrated to us by some of the policies, the neighbourhood plan and everything else, because and I know things have changed since 2016 and definitely since July 2011. I know things have all changed since then, but would that be grounds for a refusal? I'm not interested at this moment in time, Chair, of being told whether that will succeed in that appeal or no, because once again, we just as well not bother if that's always going to be the criteria that we fall back to. Because actually, like the Wells Street one, nothing to do with this, bigger, perhaps every now and then we've just got to test it. Every now and then we've got to actually say, do you know what? I know, but this is the right thing to do. There has been issues about community balance. I think if a proposal came forward, you know, which gave residential or something like that, which would help the balance, again, a bit like the other application, I think it would sail through. And what I would like to hear is, are those, Chair, reasonable grounds for refusal? And if they are, then obviously through the discussion and the debate, we may be minded to say, actually, on that basis, we're going to refuse. But I'd like to hear what the other members say before. You may guess that's where I am at the moment, but I'm open to be convinced one way or t'other. Would those be reasonable grounds or part of the grounds for refusal?
I think Roger said no just a second ago, but we'll move it across all that.
With respect, we didn't even, you know, we're being closed down before we've had the discussion. We shouldn't have that.
So it wasn't my intention to close it down, actually. I was merely referring to change the neighbourhood plan. I don't think there are any policies in there you can rely on. The policy you need to focus on is policy H5 of the local plan.
Who else?
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Well, shock horror, folks. As a barrister, I would say that barristers can be wrong. You know, just the fact that somebody who has qualified like I qualified puts things down on a piece of paper as their opinion does not mean that that opinion is right. I think we should disregard barristers' opinions for that basis. I do think that we have to look at Wells Street. We have to look at Hoopin Street. We have to look at the figures that were given particularly by Councillor Kevin Mitchell, what Councillor Pearce said, and what Councillor Michael Mitchell said. A policy on imbalance is interesting. It is very clear why the neighbourhood plan, or one of the prime reasons it came into being, was for community balance. You've heard about Hoopin Street. The residents didn't object when that was going to become housing for ordinary people. I am pretty confident that a design like this, as Councillor Bialik has said, as affordable homes, partly residential homes, would not have the same objection. What is abundantly clear is that putting another 26 or so students into 11 square metre shoeboxes, as is planned, is going to further disrupt the balance in this neighbourhood. It will cause further loss of amenity to the existing residents who already suffer because of the proximity of such a huge number of students. It is perfectly clear that policy SD3, I don't think it can be ignored. It talks about, absolutely right, this is not, sadly, a proposal for an infill site for affordable homes. But that does not mean that one ignores policy SD3. What it indicates to any sensible developer would be, if we looked at putting homes in this site, the neighbourhood plan's demands would be satisfied on two counts. Firstly, there would be no further community imbalance, and secondly, we'd have the support of local residents. I find it extraordinary, particularly in an area that has well-defined residents' associations and a neighbourhood forum, that the developer didn't bother to consult with them, talk to them about it at all. It shows a lack of understanding of the local community. The issue as to parking permits, we know that students get parking permits that shouldn't get parking permits. If this is approved tonight, which I sincerely hope it isn't, can I ask that there is a condition put on it that Exeter City Council notifies Devon County Council that no parking permit should be offered for this property, because that has not happened in the past.
Car-free development, therefore they will not be eligible.
I'm sorry, they get them.
They're not, that building is not allowed to us. If they use it for another house, that's Devon County's issue. But the current consent does not give those houses. And believe me, in my day job, I deal with a lot of flats where they have been moved into them and they're very cross. They can't get
And
parking.
I bet if you ask any resident who lives in St James here, they will give you categoric, absolutely firm issues where students have obtained parking permits.
And they may do that through someone else's house, and that's for Devon County to sort out. But this development will not get parking permits.
In the past, because ECC hasn't notified Devon have granted them. Sorry, this has happened. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
Who's next to speak, if anyone? Councillor Branston.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to congratulate all the councillors on all the information that they gave us, which I think was really worthwhile. I think all the inner city wards, all the city wards, are clearly dominated by students, and I certainly won't be voting in support of this application.
Councillor Light.
I'm going to go against the grain here, I'm afraid, people. We heard a lot of technical information, a lot of this clause and that paper and this ward and that thing. Students need somewhere to live. Let's look at the elephant in the room, which is it's about students in principle. I would love to see family homes in this area. I myself am struggling to find a family home for my family. But that's not, we have to consider what's in front of us. I see a good looking development in an unused space with solar PV, provision for solar PV. It looks like, you know, a nice warm home. I've got friends who live on that road, on that end of that road, and it is all students in that specific area. It's not perfect, it's not ideal, but we can only vote on what comes before us. We have over 20,000 students in Exeter. They have to live somewhere. People need housing. Yes, it's not affordable. It would be great if it was, but again, you make it affordable by building more houses. This is just true across the board for family homes or for student accommodation. I know Councillor Bialek said, you know, read the room, and I did with the last proposal, but you know, if we always read the room, no one ever wants them to live near them. No one ever wants them, right? They're the immigrants of the day. And I think, you know, it's sad because the students are also part of our community. Maybe they don't bring all the same benefits as in a traditional community, but they are part of our community. They make up a big proportion of Exeter and what Exeter has to offer to people. And I would like to think that we are a community that welcomes people from this demographic who, by the way, have suffered exponentially during the lockdowns. You know, with suicide rates, even in Exeter, in my ward actually, which is the Pennsylvania ward, which has a lot of students, and because of that, I helped to take forward the Article 4 directive because residents have brought those concerns, and I completely understand those concerns, and I try to moderate and make sure that we speak with the university and talk to students when these issues arise, because we should be bringing them into the community rather than just saying that they are unwelcome. Please don't shout at me.
Sorry, that's not welcome. If you continue to shout, I will close down the meeting, and I don't want to do that. So please stop shouting and being abusive to people for their opinions.
If we want to live in a democracy, we have to be able, as councillors, to say these things rather than we're just saying this because people on the floor will shout at us otherwise. There are many students that aren't here, so no one's speaking for them. I'm just putting forward a case for the many students who are struggling to find somewhere to live. Yes, Councillor Jobson said, you know, it could be bigger and blah, blah, blah. These properties maybe, you know, you have objections on that ground. But I know students that are living in drafty Victorian houses on that road. They're living in damp conditions that are making them sick. This is not an exaggeration. There's lots of data to back this up. We need decent homes for them, and we need more housing across the board so that we can bring down the cost for everybody. That impacts everybody. That's all I had to say. I appreciate if people don't want to hear it, but I'm hoping that I'm giving a voice to a group that I think should be a valued part of the community. Yes, there are certain issues that people have with students. I live in a ward where I represent these people and I deal with these issues regularly, but those issues don't mean that we should just say, well, they're not welcome here. We might as well say, get rid of the university, because these people are here and they need somewhere to live, and there is a shortage of places for them to live. Thank you.
Councillor Aspartian.
Thank you, Chair. Can we not just ask the developer very nicely to do 50-50 and have half normal homes and half student homes?
We have to decide the application that's before us, Councillor Aspartian, as lovely as that idea sounds. Aspartian, sorry. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I just want to bring us back to the application. I think it's really important. I support purpose-built student accommodation, and I'm a councillor in St David's, and there's an over-predomination of purpose-built student accommodation in the area. So having a view about a balanced community is not an anti-student view. Students make a really important contribution to our city, and it's really important that we create communities where students and non-students live together and create a community. The higher the proportion of HMOs and purpose-built student accommodation in an area creates a very transient community, and it's very hard then to create that balanced community which makes an area very livable that we're looking to achieve in our planning policy. It's been very clearly set out by the councillors in the ward and the chair of the St James Neighbourhood Partnership about the role of the neighbourhood plan in terms of its objective to create that balanced community. And I believe that our policy H5 also sets out that objective. So this is absolutely about planning matters and about how we create residential areas that are suitable for short-term residents and long-term residents, regardless of what their sort of status is and their role in society. So, but I cannot support this because I feel it's contrary to the council's planning policies. And I do want to say that I do like the design, so I would strongly encourage the developer to, come back again, but change the nature of the accommodation.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. I think everyone said everything that needs to be said. I do want to reference back to Councillor Bialik and Branston. Thank you. Reference back to the information we have an officer's recommendation, as Councillor Bialik said. There's no point in us if we just listen to them. So a councillor's officer's recommendation, we've also got the legal advice of our solicitor that this is illegal, because I just want to make that clear, because we seem to have got a little obsessed with the barrister that came from the developers. Our legal advice says that we don't think this is a strong application. We have to do it on planning grounds. I'm quite happy for you to make whatever decision you choose to make, but just remember that in making that decision, okay? The legal advice and how we do it. I'm going to put this to the vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. I'm doing a good application. Yeah? I used two votes. Yeah. All those against? Okay,
One abstention.
Yeah. So our new process for refusing applications is that we are now deferring the application. Remember that? And we will go back to the officers who will, having listened to this debate, will write a list of reasons for refusal, which we will bring to the next committee meeting. So this application's current status, which I'd like you all to agree with, is that it has been deferred. Okay? No, it's deferred, otherwise we get into a legal situation. So the application has been deferred. Everyone understands that? It will come back with reasons for refusal. Oh, Simon Cameron's looking at me, he scares me. Right, the solicitor says it's fine, I've got this right. It will come back with reasons for deferral to the next committee meeting. Okay?
Sorry, reason.
Would it be minuted that it was?
Given there was a vote in favour of refusal, we chose to defer, I think is how it will be minuted. But the current status of the application is it's been deferred, okay? Thank you very much.
So, Chair, if I may just clarify.
Thank you.
The decision has been to defer.
Yeah.
And Roger will come back with detailed reasons for refusal at the next meeting. There'll be an opportunity to have any further debate, and there'll be an opportunity to take forward the officer's recommendation as already stated, or those reasons for refusal can be.
I'd also like to say I said the next meeting, and I think that's really unfair on the officers because we're working 2 weeks behind. So it'll probably be the meeting after that, okay? Thank you. We were minded to refuse, but we deferred the application until the next meeting. So there's no decision has been made at this time. Does that make sense? Yeah. Thank you, everybody who's come, whether you're local councillors or local residents. I'm going to take a 2-minute break for everybody. I'm really sorry for the next application, but I think we probably all need it. our final application on the agenda, which is the McCarthy and Stone Retirement Lifestyles Limited construction of 62 retirement apartments at the Buckle Lodge Hotel, Topsham Road, Exeter. And that you again, Richard?
It's me again.
Oh, yeah, you need that.
Thank you. So, this is the site, as you can see, the building, the Buckle Lodge Hotel, sits towards the rear of the site with a fairly substantial landscaped area and parking to the front of the site and to the southeast of the site. That's probably a more informative image, so you can see it in the context. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the hotel in Topsham Road. A few photographs. This is the entrance to the site. Looking across the front of the site. Car park. Towards the other end of the front of the site where the ground is lower. This is the proposed site plan. So the proposal is to demolish the existing hotel building and replace it with a building with a larger footprint, a U-shaped building, sitting mainly in the position of existing buildings, but it is larger in terms of footprint. Car park in more or less the same place as the existing car park. Floor plans. So this is for 62 beds, bedroom, older person's accommodation. Three stories. This is the front elevation. This is the rear side elevations. Key issues here are the scale and massing and the design, amenity of neighbours and occupants, and landscaping. This application has the proposal was we had a previous application which was refused. The reasons are set out in the report. As a consequence of that, there was refused on grounds of the design, the scale and massing, amongst other things. The applicant has made provisions as a consequence of that. It's smaller than the scheme that came before. It's also been to a design review panel, which has assessed it, and the applicant's made further modifications as a consequence of that. So it reflects the observations of the design review panel. In terms of amenity, it provides acceptable level of amenity for the occupants and complies with the council's standards in terms of relationship with surrounding houses. Landscaping, the proposal has been modified to save more of the trees. The original scheme that we refused involved loss of some significant trees. This version is supported, or not supported, but the tree officer doesn't object to it, and makes better use of the existing landscaped area around the periphery of the site as a form of amenity for the future occupants. So on that basis, the proposal is recommended for approval, subject to legal agreement to secure contribution towards off-site affordable housing, and also an NHS requested contributions. And I need to make a correction to the report. In section 10, it refers to the amount of money required by the NHS or requested by the NHS for primary care and the amount for secondary care. They're the wrong way round. So it's the same amount of money, but it's just the correct amount for primary is 16,128, and secondary is 36,347, not the other way around, as it says in the report. The recommendation is also to add an additional condition to the ones listed in your report on the basis of advice from the local lead flood authority, Devon County Council. Asked for a condition for the detailed design of surface water drainage system. Thank you, Chair.
Does anyone have any questions for John's application? Councillor Johnson.
Could you go back to the internal picture of the rooms?
Like that, yeah.
Like, yes. There seems to be, we're looking along that front section, that's a very long corridor. It's not broken up, neither's the ones at the side very much. it's rather stark, it seems. Is that the only way that those internal people can get to their homes? Go along a long corridor?
It is. Well, the agent is here, so you can.
Yeah.
Any further, Councillor Moore?
I just wanted to know in terms of there's no pictures of how it relates to neighbouring buildings in terms of previous concerns about being overbearing and such like. Can you just explain how that's been addressed? You talked about one bit is lower.
Yes. You're right. I don't think any of these drawings do really illustrate the relationship with the neighbouring property, which is unfortunate. But you can see on the left-hand side there, it drops down to reflect the topography, and in terms of distance from neighbouring properties, we have guidance in our design guidance on distance to avoid overlooking and distance to avoid overbearing in terms of height is in relation to how close it is, and it complies with all of that guidance in all directions. So there wouldn't be any reason justification for refusal on overlooking or overbearing.
Could you just go back to the overall aerial plan, please?
Sorry.
Back up. And that's it. Thank you. Okay. That just gives us a better picture of the existing properties around it. Thank you, Roger.
No questions?
No.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell.
Just a question. Did the planning team have any comments about the design, which seems a bit utilitarian and a bit drab? You know, for
Yes.
Yes. I just wondered, has it changed, or is that the best they can do?
Well, it has changed because it was the version we refused, and also the earlier version of this current proposal was not quite like you see it. Not quite like this.
It was worse.
You can see it's got, perhaps the agent will want to comment about this, but there's been an introduction of different materials and more in and out, to create interest. And that's it's an improvement on the original scheme. And the design review panel, which as you know is made up of experts in the field, felt it to be acceptable and appropriate for the site.
All right, that was it with questions. We're going to move to public speakers. Councillor Vizard going to speak on the standing order number 44 first.
Thank you very much. Yes. Good evening. Thank you very much. I appreciate it's been a very long meeting already, and I appreciate you have deferred or chucked out some combination of the two so far. So there will be a temptation, I suspect, to look for something to approve this evening. Now, I am going to explain why it isn't how this commission, it shouldn't be. Exactly my point. So I'm going to explain why you really should take this one seriously. I am conscious that this is the first time that members of the committee will have seen this application, as it was rightly refused previously before reaching planning committee. Just for noting, 27 public objections, some of the public here tonight, and I'm very happy to be speaking on their behalves and very much support their views on this. The Buckrow Lodge site is a valuable haven of trees, biodiversity and wildlife, but it has previously been developed and it is generally accepted that it is a suitable site for homes. The St Leonard's community is not against development of this site. We just want it to be appropriate and not harmful to the area. So what I'm calling on you to consider very carefully tonight is whether the application for 62 private flats in a 3-storey building, replacing a low-rise existing building, is an appropriate development, and crucially, whether the scale and massing differ to any significant extent from the original proposal, which was so firmly refused on these and other grounds last year. To briefly comment on affordable housing, it is to the planning officer's credit that one of the reasons for refusal of the original application was a lack of any affordable housing provision. So while it is good that a sum of money has been agreed as a contribution towards affordable homes elsewhere, this is not quite the same thing as providing affordable homes on this site and represents, in my view, something of a missed opportunity. As Devon Wildlife Consultants point out in their report on this application, which may be part of your report packs, and certainly on the website, Schedule 14, it says, of the Environment Act 2021 will require a minimum 10% biodiversity net gain as a condition of planning permission in England. Their calculations find that the development proposals are currently likely to result in a minor net gain in biodiversity on the site. It doesn't give a percentage. They have suggested mitigations and enhancements, but members need to satisfy themselves that the plans do not represent only minimal enhancement or indeed a potential loss over time through lack of ongoing management, but real sustainable progress that maximises this wooded, biodiverse neighbourhood asset on Exeter's busiest and most congested road. While I acknowledge the efforts made to retain trees, including those with tree preservation orders, and to include some new planting, this proposal does not protect the character and amenity of the neighbourhood, and the loss of a sensitively built environment on a site which contributes greatly to an area of the city dominated by Topsham Road would be harmful. The original refusal cited the following, and bear with me while I read it out, but it's important. The proposal is contrary to Objective 9 and Policy CP4 and CP17 of the Exeter Local Development Framework Core Strategy. Saved policies DG1C, DG1G, DG1H, DG1I or LI, I think, DG1, DG4A and DG6A of the Exeter Local Plan, and Exeter City Council Supplementary Planning Document, Residential Design 2010, because, as it says, as a result of the size, massing, position and external appearance of the building and the layout of the site, the proposed scheme would, 1, present an unduly large, unsympathetic and poorly designed form of development that would not fit comfortably within its plot or with the character of the local area, and also it represents an overdevelopment of the site to the detriment of the character and appearance of the local area. That's the quote from the previous refusal. The urban design and landscaping comments obtained by the council amplify the objections to the massing, character and scale of the proposed development. These highlight that the replacement building has a larger footprint than the existing one, as it has been said, meaning that at its western end, it is substantially closer to 8 existing dwellings on Barrack Road and 1 dwelling on Topsham Road, and the vertical massing and scale of the proposed buildings in relation to the surrounding context and the strategy of flat roofs of the proposal means that the overall impact is greater three-dimensionally than that of the existing pitched roof building. In his correspondence with planning officers, the urban design and landscaping consultant says, "I am in agreement with the objection in respect of the massing and general scale of the building. For me, the biggest question remaining is still about the overall scale of the building in relation to the site and neighbouring buildings." Now, this was a key point of the previous refusal of the application, and I ask you to consider how a reduction of just 3 units from 65, which is what it was first time when it was refused, to 62 now, and a minor alteration in architectural design address this to any significant extent. I cannot see how it remotely does so, and I believe that this development, if approved, would, through overdevelopment, scale and massing, cause substantial harm to the visual and environmental amenity of the site, as well as to neighbouring homes and to this part of the city. The plans would need to be more substantially scaled back before this previous point of refusal is addressed. The committee, I think, should be concerned about the message the council sends out if it first refuses an application on substantive material grounds, then subsequently accepts the smallest of concessions that the applicant thinks it can get away with, but which do not go anywhere near far enough to addressing the original grounds for refusal. So in summary, the material point, which as stated in the previous refusal, runs contrary to our core strategy and local plan, has not been addressed by the amendments to this scheme in front of you tonight. The council has taken residents' desire for green spaces and concerns about overdevelopment and mitigation for the congested Topsham Road very seriously in the past. It should be applauded for protecting and enhancing Ludwell Valley Park and Northbrook approach and consistently refusing development on Mount Radford Lawn. Planning members can demonstrate a continuing commitment to appropriate development around Topsham Road and to mitigating and minimising harm by holding its nerve and refusing this application this evening on the clear grounds that it remains of unacceptable and unsympathetic scale and would represent overdevelopment in relation to the site, the neighbourhood and adjacent homes. Thank you.
Any questions? No. Okay. Councillor Bialik?
Yeah, Councillor Vizard, I sum that up in my head is it's the scale and mass, which really is the main thing you're worried about. Not against it in principle, scale and mass, some of the biodiversity thing, right? That is really where you're coming from.
That's the key point. It's not significantly changed from its original.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now speaking against the application is Peter Beecham. Thank you, Mr. Beecham. You have 3 minutes, I'm afraid, and then we will cut you off. Thank you.
No, you press the sort of one that looks like it's shouting.
Red light comes on.
Councillor Newby, 1 metre.
My apologies, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just give a speech out.
Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very good to be here. Thank you. My name is Peter Beecham, and my wife and I have been residents of a neighbouring property, the Buckrow Lodge Hotel, since 1976. Neighbours have kindly agreed I should represent their objections, and certainly, as you heard from Councillor Vizard, that 27 have objected to the proposal. I'm afraid I've worked for more than 50 years in the planning system, and latterly as Director of Heritage Protection at English Heritage. And as such, I did a lot of work on major city sites, sensitive historic sites, in most of our major cities during my career. Indeed, I was pleased to work with Exeter City Council and Land Securities to secure the successful redevelopment of Princess Hay. So you can see from that, I am not opposed to development in principle. But as Councillor Vizard said, I am strongly opposed to this on what I consider to be firm planning grounds, which I think you have every right to continue to refuse. My reasons are these. The Buckrow Lodge Hotel site is an important survival of Exeter's historic development. It was one of a string of villas set out along the road from Exeter to Topsham from the 18th century onwards. The defining character of these villas, County Hall's another one, is that they were one building, but in very, very generous landscape grounds. And the planting is very important to that. In this case, it's even more important because it's a residual site, the only one that really remains, actually, apart from Wellingtonia Park, which represents the Royal Beach Nurseries. Internationally famous, you'll have read about that a lot, but actually I think it's quite interesting that the generous landscape grounds that everyone talks about in the Buckrow Lodge Hotel is so important because of the Beach connection. And indeed, the hotel even labels this restaurant the Beach Restaurant. Our objection, therefore, is to the scale of what's proposed and its detrimental effect on both the intrinsic character of the site and our neighbourhood. Achieving the number of residential units proposed requires a predominantly, as you see, a 3-storey structure occupying almost the whole of the site. It's a monolith. However carefully you dress it up, you can't get away from the scale of this. And as one council has already observed, the straight line of the corridor inside shows exactly what the nature of this is. It's a slab, essentially. I think that upends the historic nature of these villas. The house was always subservient to its setting, and in this case, if this is approved, you get the reverse result. You get actually a building that dominates its setting.
Sorry, you've run out of time.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right. I was really enjoying listening.
much of what the rest I was going to say, if I'm just allowed to share one further comment. Much of what I was just going to say was to say that I absolutely endorse what Councillor Vizard said. I think he summed all the rest up very well.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Does anyone have any questions
Oh,
about the application for Councillor Beecham? Because I feel like I talked to him about Councillor Beecham.
Councillor?
Yeah,
Have been promoted.
Not demoted.
Oh.
Hang on, so anyone got any questions? Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you. Can you just sort of comment on, so you talked about the building in its setting and the importance of that, although obviously it's not listed as a heritage asset. Can you talk about the relationship of the building to its neighbours?
To the neighbours on around it?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I ought to have said I wasn't one time responsible for the listing system for England. So and oddly, you know, I had looked at this in terms of my professional role. I mean, I think the fact that it's not technically listable doesn't mean to say it doesn't have value. But I completely agree that it's developable as a site and it should be developed. There's no question about that at all in my mind. Thank you for that, because for your question, because I think that's the crucial one really, which is missed out, if I may say so, from Roger's report. I do think the impact on the neighbourhood is understated in this report considerably. Most of the houses around are either bungalows on the western side, or they're fairly modest semi-detached houses on the Buckroll Lane side. And where we live in Barrack Road. I think the problem for can I just say also, I don't think we are, so my wife and I are not as affected as others are, but those houses running back as you see them from on the top of the screen at the moment are much more profoundly affected, because they instead of having a virtually invisible building at the moment, which pokes up at various points with a pitched roof, they will face a 3-story development, which is, however carefully played around with, it's still a slab with balconies and all the gubbins there, instead of a green canopy. So the combination of, from the neighbour's point, sorry, just for the neighbour's point of view, I can just finish the sentence, Chair. From the neighbour's point of view, the difference is profound.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Are there any further questions for this meeting? And you need to be concise in your reply from that one.
I apologise. I do apologise.
No more questions? Thank you very much. Speaking in favour of the application is Ian. I'm just going to get this right. Ian Bentinelli, sorry. Practice that and everything that came out wrong. Sorry. With your name. You would have 3 minutes and then I'll time questions after.
Right. Good evening, Chairperson and members of the Planning Committee. The proposed development before you has been carefully considered by the applicant and has involved positive discussions with officers and the design review panel. In response to the comments received from the design review panel, the design has been refined in detailing as well as reducing it in footprint and massing. As set out in the detailed planning report, the proposal is now considered acceptable in all respects, as summarised in section 4 of the planning report, which concludes: the proposal is considered to be a sustainable development when balancing the development plan policies, NPPF, including the presumption in favour of sustainable development in paragraph 11, the National Planning Guidance, and the constraints and opportunities of the site. The benefits of the scheme include an affordable housing contribution of £345,000 plus SIL, and of course the healthcare contribution of approximately £52,000. The proposal will meet the requirements of policy H5 of the local plan and policy CP5 of the core strategy, in that it would meet a particular housing need for an ageing population, the only type of need described as critical in the NPPG. It would provide greater security and convenience and reduce feelings of isolation and vulnerability for residents, improved independence, health and well-being, whilst maintaining an independent lifestyles. Most residents have family and friends in the locality and are able to remain an important part of the local community. It produces a reduced demand on public sector resources and health services. Residents have better health and well-being and spend fewer nights in hospital. This all has a reduced impact on NHS resources.
It would also release underoccupied houses and thus help boost local housing supply, which is another aim of the NPPF. It would also help to meet the council's 5-year housing land supply. I would simply refer to the planning officer's report, which has given thorough consideration to the proposals, and I would therefore hope that you would be able to endorse your officer's recommendation and grant planning approval. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Councillor Jobson and then Councillor Light.
Is it possible to go back to that same slide, please?
That one.
Yes, thank you.
I have two questions. Firstly, where are the lifts situated?
Well, I can't see it from here, but usually inside the entrance, there's usually a lift.
So the entrance, is that on the right-hand side? Yes. Where the steps are? So if you live at the far end, you've got a long corridor to walk down from. Lifts, we talk about an aging population. It's not exactly user-friendly, is it? Is there any way that long corridor can be broken up, some different more access entrances could be put in? You might have to lose a few more flats, but it would mean people could access their homes much quicker.
Sorry, do you mean more access points or more lifts?
Well,
Well, this is the typical design in terms of a single corridor with units on either side. It's an actual design. Also, you can find it in the Planning Officers Society document on retirement accommodation. So it's fairly typical of both the private and public sector arrangements.
That wasn't the question, but I was asking whether there could be more.
Councillor Lights is next.
So in 6.0 in the report, it says that there are revisions to the scheme
Sorry. In 6.0, it says, in response to an independent design review by the Exeter Design Quality Partnership, there have been revisions to the scheme, including, and then it says, modifications to the internal layout to avoid long corridors and increase natural light. But there is a super long corridor, so I just wondered if you could clarify that. And another question was just generally, you referenced this being a standard design.
No.
Could you just elaborate a little bit on why this specific design was chosen? Because I think a few of us are concerned about that and how it specifically meets the needs of this demographic who would be living there. Thank you.
Okay, when I referred to standard, I just simply meant that it's a sort of standard layout in terms of having a central corridor with units on either side of it. In terms of design, we obviously looked at the site quite carefully. We've got independent architects who advise us. We also took urban design comments into account and came up with a scheme. We then submitted it for a pre-app. Unfortunately, after 6 months, we had to launch the application. We didn't get a great deal of feedback during that first application, whereas we then looked at the reasons for refusal. We didn't fully agree with them, but we thought, let's have another look at this. And so, as part of that process, we had further refinements to the scheme. And we think that a building of this style would actually fit in on this particular site. So we've taken independent advice along the way. We were also recommended to go to the design review panel. We met them, discussed the application, or presented it to them, I should say. We got feedback from them, and we took into account their feedback and modified the scheme. I think Councillor Vizard mentioned that it reduced it by 3 units from the earlier application, but that's because there's been a change in the internal mix. The actual floor space reduction, from recollection, and I have to say it's recollection, it's probably about 300 square metres. The top floor has changed quite significantly in terms of reduced roof massing.
Councillor Moore, then Councillor Wowley.
Thank you. Just want to follow up on Councillor Light's comments. The design review panel said that the design was potentially problematic and formulaic. So in terms of, can you just describe how, from the external point of view, how you reference the local area and the context of the site in the design. Second point is you in your presentation, thank you for that, you talked about this accommodation would reduce demand on public services. Can you just clarify, are these apartments or are they sheltered housing with support facilities, support services, and is that why they're going to reduce demand? And the amount, third question, the amount that is suggested as a contribution for affordable housing, is that equating to 35% of the housing in accordance with our council policy? Thank you.
If I can take a minute in reverse order, if that's okay. In terms of affordable housing, the headline policy talks about 35%, but it's based on viability assessment, or rather, it presumes that such is viable. So what was done here was we came in with a viability assessment.
I thought everyone with a hearing aid.
Okay. We came in with a viability assessment, as we had last time. This time the council put it through its viability assessors. It reviewed the GDV costs, etc., which had risen substantially, at least a bit of inflation. And the sum that's been agreed is 345. So it's been viability tested and audited by the council's auditors, if you like. In terms of health, this is what's called Category 2 sheltered accommodation, or it used to be called Category 2 sheltered accommodation, which was a housing definition. They are essentially self-contained flats with a house manager on site, broadly speaking, 9 to 5, office hours, and a care line system beyond. The data that McCarthy & Stone have from its various developments indicates that, actually independent research by, I think it's by the University of Oxford, not Oxford University, but the other university, which is actually in the planning statements. You can check out the data there. Indicates that people who do move to this type of accommodation tend to have better health outcomes. And I think on average, it was something like it saves the NHS £3,500. I can't remember the exact figures, but it is all documented in the planning statements that's been submitted. I wish I brought a glass of water now. I've got one at the back of the room. Would you mind if I just, because I'm running out of breath. It's on the floor. Here you go. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very own.
Thank you. Sorry. That's it in terms of health outcomes. It's just generally that people, well, the entry age is 60. The typical age on entry is early to mid 70s, and it usually follows bereavement, ill health, things of that nature, and a question of downsizing. So it doesn't suit everyone. It hits the 60 years of age entry, like me. And so it has this better outcome. In terms of design, it is in a sense a standalone site, that it's obviously it's surrounded by houses, but it is a standalone site. Although the plans here on display tonight don't show, I think you mentioned a street scene. One of the members here mentioned the street scene. We did submit those documents, so you would be able to see cross sections, how the building relates to its neighbours, and we've also submitted verified visual images, so you can see it in context. We believe it's a good design. It's a good design for the site, given where it is.
Mr. Bentinelli, we've got 3 more councillors with questions, so I'm going to move you on a little bit. That's okay. Councillor Bialik.
Yeah, I don't need a long answer to this. I just need it to be very, very sites are very focused. You said you consulted all these people. Did you consult or do you consult relevant age groups, people in this age groups, the dementia-friendly societies and things like that, about that long corridor? Because I've canvassed something similar in the St Thomas area, and it's like I thought I was Vision HMP Exeter, and it. That's all I'm saying. A good point. What Councillor Jobson meant, dementia, people like that can have issues about some of these things. We need to talk about that. And if you want some good ideas, visit Edwards Court, because that is exceptional. Although it is for aftercare, but it is actually exceptional on how a design of corridors and everything else like that can be done to make sure people feel welcome at home, and that is their home. I don't know who you talk to about who's likely to go in there. I'm over 60, by the way. Don't send me anything through the post, will you?
Thank you, Chair. Oh, sorry, you probably need to answer that. I did feel like
yes, sorry. Okay, the first point is that this is not a care home, so it's not a question of being dementia friendly or not being dementia friendly. It's simply not a care home. McCarthy and Stone are the leading providers of this type of accommodation, and they do continuous research, with its residents about what they like and what they don't like, and so designs continually evolve. I mean, the building, for example, the apartments are probably about 15% larger than they were about 10 years ago.
No, I can't say anything.
Thank you, Chair. I was surprised to see that Devon and Somerset Fire Authority said the proposal does not comply with the building regulations.
Yeah, they're wrong. They're wrong. All buildings comply with building regulations, and we responded to that as well. And I think they subsequently withdrew their comments. But yeah, well, it does comply. It does comply with building regs.
Control and building regs is that we will give consent, but then they won't get signed off if the building. They kind of sit separately. Do you want to explain it? You're in charge.
The consultation response I'm referring to there, we haven't seen being withdrawn, but I think it's neither here nor there in the context of planning decision today. Is it's very clear. It says for some technical reason it doesn't comply with the building regs, but there's no problem with granting planning permission for it, because that can be dealt with at the building reg stage, something to do with the fabric of the building. Right. So if you grant permission today for this, it won't be compromising any aspect of the design from the building regs point of view. So it's not. It probably didn't. It was unnecessary for the fire authority to mention it in their consultation response to a planning application.
It's in the same context. The energy from waste transfer station. People worried about the emissions from that. That's regulated by the Environment Agency. So if there's a problem with that, they'd stop it. The actual building regs sit the same way. We give it consent, but if the building regs are not complied with, it won't be viable to being opened. So changes would have to be made. So it doesn't impact on how we do it. They sit sort of together but separately. Roger's in charge of both of them, so he'll know.
Well, the changes are capable of being made without making a difference to the plans that would be approved as part of this application.
Yeah, statutory consulting, not yes. Yeah. Sorry,
it does comply. We do start off quite early on with a fire strategy.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Mitchell.
In your presentation, you talked about effectively this was house recycling, that local houses then became available on the market, people would be downsizing, moving into these McCarthy's own units. Particularly in the southwest, have McCarthy Stone got any evidence that supports that statement? Because my concern is how many of these are people coming from other parts of the country to live in an attractive part of the world rather than freeing up houses in our own community.
The answer is it's a national statistic that typically the residents of McCarthy and Stone usually, around 50% usually come from a 5-mile radius is a typical result. About 70% come from a 20-mile radius, and the rest do come from further afield, usually because of family connections with it.
Thank you very much. As with any application, Councillor Mitchell, we cannot control who moves into the Manchester building. Okay.
Just the statement was made.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I understand where your point of view is coming from. Thank you very much for coming and speaking to us. We will now open up the debate.
Anyone? No one's got an opinion now.
I'll be very brief because it is getting late. I'm getting tired. What I would like to say is that I think the presentation from Councillor Vizard, and particularly from Mr. Beaker, I thought but for both, it was compelling, and I will vote against this application. Thank you.
Hold on, Councillor Johnson, say it again.
What's that?
You want to speak?
Right. No one else wants to speak? No, Councillor Bialik.
I just want to say the representation here, particularly Councillor Bizarre, made a number of references at potential areas that we could refuse if we were minded to. I really need some guidance on whether or not those would actually stand up and we could actually do that if we were minded to refuse, because we just can't. We can't go, oh, well, look, and it's not a question of 2-1 or 3-0 or 0-0 or anything. We've got to give proper reasons if we're going to refuse, and we actually have to justify to ourselves and residents why we accept, which is there. So I just want this to be balanced. So I need to know. No disrespect to you, Councillor. I need a bit more than say, well, he was very good, wasn't he? I need a bit more than that, which he was very good, by the way. Okay, I need to add those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the previous application was refused in part on the grounds of the scale and massing and design of the building. At that time, it hadn't been to a design review panel, for example. It now has. It's got the endorsement of the design review panel. Councillor Bizard did refer to some comments from our council's urban designer on it, but I think they must have been old comments. The most recent ones we've got from the current urban design officer acknowledged that the scheme was supportable. So if we refuse it on design grounds, we will be in a weak position on appeal, having had clear support from a panel of experts, and the NPPF encourages us to pay attention to the views of an independent design review panel in reaching our decisions. It would also, there's a published observation from our own urban designer that he doesn't think there's a problem with the proposal. The other reasons for refusal before were about the impact on the landscape and the trees. We don't have an objection from our tree officer anymore. The overdevelopment of the site, again, as something that was addressed by the design review panel. Contribution to affordable housing, we now have one. We didn't have one before. So I think, although you could make a general argument about the scale and massing being appropriate, it doesn't harm any of the neighbours to the extent that it's contrary to any of our design guidance policies. And so we would really be struggling on appeal to justify refusal of this. And I would urge you to approve it.
So can I ask for clarification? So with urban design comments, what's the date of that one that was where they said they supported it? They were quite strong in their feedback.
It's in the application, isn't it?
Yeah, we have got a different urban designer from the original. The identity of the person has changed since the application has been submitted, and the comments that I'm referring to would have been made in November or December, I think, and they were as a consequence of the most recent modifications to the drawings.
Okay.
So, Dion.
I'm so tired. I, again, on balance, I have listened to all the arguments, and although I have some reservations about the layout, that's not at all my area of expertise. I'm going to take what I've heard on that about being the best for people there. I like the fact that there's a person there 9 to 5. I think it would free up space in the area for people to be able to move into this kind of accommodation. So I would support this application. I think that something's going to get built there. We don't want it to be students, do we? Anyway, so I would. Oh, I'm just thinking out loud. So but somebody's got to go there, and it's just my point earlier. just my point earlier that all these different groups need places to live, and it seems like a decent application on those grounds. So I would support it.
So I think in my summing up, I would say that there is a romanticism that I will miss from the Buckle Lodge, having been there. And goodness knows how many funerals we've all been to there. You got married there? Which time? Sorry. But I think that is always difficult when we deal with applications, when there are buildings that sometimes are not even that attractive, but that we all have those sort of memories and those links, and you know, we've been to weddings or funerals or whatever may have happened there. I do think that the application is not to my taste, but I've been told many times by many officers on this panel that it's subjective, and the design review panel have reached a different conclusion. They are experts in their field, and there's a lot more of them than just me saying I don't like them. I think that there are worse uses for that site, and I think that actually the landscaping around it is a lot more favourable than perhaps you would be if you put much more on the site, which I'm surprised sometimes when people don't. So it's going to be one of those heavy heart sort of decisions, but I think based on the information here, and that I don't think we have got grounds for refusal. There might be something better that we want on the site, but actually this application is not bad enough, and that's not high praise for it, but that, you know, I think that probably I'm supporting this application, and I'd like to move it to the vote. Would somebody like to, and would someone like to second? Councillor Bialik or Councillor Snow, take your pick, and Councillor Lights was first. In that case, all those in favour, please raise your hand.
5 in favour.
All those against?
5 against.
Oh no. One abstention. Thanks for this, guys. As the chair of the committee, I have the deciding vote, and I'm going to. I do. Ask the man. I do. And I will stick with my original decision. I'm very sorry for those of you who are not happy with the decision I made. On to the final items on the agenda, we have the list of decisions made and withdrawn applications. I understand, Roger, we have no questions on that?
No questions.
I would like to say it proves nobody reads it, because in my patch there's a dog insemination that doesn't need a change of use apparently to run some kind of breeding farm up there. So none of you read that. And also there are the appeal decisions at the end. Have you got anything to say on those?
2 were allowed, 2 were dismissed. If anyone's interested in the detail, then contact the case officer.
One of the dismissed applications, appeals, should probably be drawn to your attention. It's land at home farm between Churchill and Park Lane on the hills on the green area that we're trying to protect. And in this case, they upheld our decision that it would be detrimental to the impact of that area. So that's some good news to end the meeting on. Thank you very much for bearing with me. Oh, just a minute.
Sorry, I had a question.
Yeah.
Roger knows what I'm going to be asking about. Is it helpful for councillors to be aware of appeals that are coming up?
Yeah. Okay.
I did notice actually in that section on page 199, it does refer to new appeals. So so in the and when we talked about the other day, I'd forgotten that as well. But so on a monthly basis, as part of this report at the back, it should mention any new appeals that come in. And there will be an opportunity to contact the case officer and talk about them.
Brilliant. So back to what I was saying. Thank you very much. I'll see you all in about 2.5 weeks.
Oh, it's going
to be another long one, people. 1.5 weeks at home.